I get shot at. A lot. But that isn't what scares me about this job. When I arrive at a home and see someone burst out of the front door clutching a rifle, I know what to expect. They have something to lose. They're scared and they don't know what to do. So I tell them. I give them resources and fighting back. I refer them to law firms who do pro bono work, government bodies and charities that can help them get back on their feet. I speak calmly and with empathy, and people listen. Some even thank me as they pack their things up and drive away. People ending themselves are harder to deal with. I get at least 3 or 4 a year, and people who do it out of spite really go all out on the spectacle. The harder it is for the bank to clean up, the better. And people assume the bank puts their house on the market the second it's seized, but a house can sit forgotten for years before I'm sent to look it over. Lone bodies swinging in empty living rooms, flesh like melted candle wax from all that time left in open air. I find it profoundly sad. These people lay themselves out like a spiteful diorama, and then no one turns up. They slit their throats while clutching eviction notices, and by the time I arrive, the blood is dried and the ink has faded. The worst ones don't just hurt themselves, but their loved ones too. Packs are more common with the elderly, but it isn't always octogenarians. Families too. It's rare, but it does happen. A sun-baked house with drawn curtains, so much time passed in dry autumn heat that their skin turned paper thin, receding lips, black, toothless gums born in a rictus grin. Hell of a thing to see staring out of a crib. Each house is its own apocalypse, its own ruined city for me to wander. Whiskey in the toilet cistern, fentanyl under the bed, bills past due. And it doesn't just end with the people we kick out. These places are empty so long, you'll often get squatters. Usually harmless, not always. Some have the potential to be thoroughly lethal, stringy men and women with flinty eyes and missing teeth who come bursting out of the moldy blankets and indoor tents, slashing box cutters wildly in the air. You could play tic-tac-toe on my forearm from all the defensive wounds. Even when they're moved on, the things they leave behind aren't exactly safe. Fumes from homemade labs can rot your lungs, and disease-positive needles stuffed down the sides of old sofa cushions wait to prick curious fingers. And the cooks get real paranoid about being robbed, so they like to rig their homes with traps. They get inventive with whatever's lying around. Shards of glass on spring-loaded broom handles, trick floorboards over boxes of razor blades, infection-smeared knives hidden beneath false windowsills. Every now and again, I find a trap that's been set off. A baseball bat rigged to lash out at anyone entering the kitchen, blood and hair dripping from the bent nails hammered into the wood. No sign of the poor guy who set it off. Just the grisly trail of gore leading out of the house and into the nearby woods. Most likely candidate is the guy who set the trap. These addicts can stay up for days and pass out, and when they wake up, the first thing they do is head for their stash, not remembering what they left behind. One time, I found the guy lying a few feet away from his own trap. He kept his money in this old metal lunchbox at the back of a cupboard, and he'd rigged it so anyone reaching in would get a hell of a surprise. The blade went in at his elbow and left just below the knuckle on his thumb. No helping him after that. He died bleeding out on his late grandmother's cold linoleum. What a god-awful way to go. And his little lunchbox? On the ground and empty of everything worth taking. Police reckon someone was with him when it happened. Must have gotten scared, so they took the cash and left him to die. It'd take a full month before I found him, and no one even reported him missing in the interim. You'd think the kid would be angry. but he wasn't. He just looked like he was scared. 19, going through withdrawal and dying slowly, curled up like a baby, one hand gripping his open wrist. You can't trap the ocean in your fist. It leaks through your fingers. That kid knew what was coming. I could see it in his eyes. Terrified. Meth is a hell of a drug. These poor guys fry their brains out in the middle of nowhere. I can't even begin to imagine what they think they see out there, what visits them in the dark. Found this trailer once that had been rigged with damn near 100 traps. They weren't particularly sophisticated, but they were numerous and vicious and desperate. They circled the lone motorhome out in the middle of the desert like an invading army made of knives and bear traps and stolen guns and even a few hastily made IEDs. Took me and a bomb squad a week just to get to the front door, and by the time we opened it, we were all fairly certain of one simple fact. This place hadn't been rigged to keep thieves out. Whoever had set the traps had been scared of something leaving. Probably just drug-fueled paranoia on behalf of whoever set them. But I think the idea that something was in there waiting for us got under our skin anyway. During the operation, we'd sometimes get shouted reports of someone moving around in the trailer, and the whole site would go to hell. Armed men and women lying on their bellies, iron sights lined up on the front door, hands shaking. I guess we kept asking ourselves over and over, what's in there that had someone so scared they set all these traps? When we finally got our answer, the first thing we found was a meth lab. Pretty par for the course. Less normal was a body that had been torn to pieces, halfway to dust after all that time in that heat had passed, but it was strewn all over the interior. Walls, floor, ceiling. Couldn't argue it was a natural death or a product of scavengers, not unless coyotes can work a lock and key. What was left of his head and torso looked like he'd gone through hell. I'm hardly a forensic expert, but it had looked to me like he died slowly and painfully. Missing fingers, teeth, one eye plucked out. Torture is what it made me think of. Even stranger than all of that, though, was what we found sat on the kitchen counter next to all those broken beakers and stained chemistry equipment. A doll. Not like a kid's doll. Porcelain, like a collector's item that had seen better days. Scared the hell out of me, given the circumstances and all. Couldn't shake the feeling whoever had made all those traps had done so with that thing in mind, which begged the question, who was the poor guy stuck inside the trailer, and what had happened to him? Cops wrote it off. Meth is a hell of a drug, so they say. We all knew that. Only, I wasn't so sure. I've seen a lot of weird stuff. Who knows what visited that poor guy out in the wild, so far from civilization. A lot of life gets lived out in the world, out in the plains or in the forests and amongst hills, far from prying eyes. You get a sense of it in my job. The sheer quantity of untold stories, failed dreams, great triumphs, abandoned canvases, well-worn guitars, heydays that came and went, or simply never came at all. Most stories follow a rhythm. Most. Some, like that doll, raise profound questions. Others aren't really stories at all, so much as nightmares, just waiting for the next victim. This world is full of hidden needles waiting for probing hands. There are rare occasions where I'll advise the bank not to sell a property. They become part of a kind of no-go zone the government has set up around the country. I only see bits of this machinery at work. Whatever bureaucracy manages it is way over my pay grade, but there is a system in place for managing the worst of the worst. I'm not talking ghosts either. None of the examples I've given so far would be candidates. Sounds messed up, I know. Scrub the blood, scrape the brains, pick the shotgun pellets out of the plaster. If the next family who move in have to contend with the ghosts of a few clumsy meth heads or disgruntled former owners, well, so be it. No, for a place to be deemed a no-go, it has to be beyond recovery and an active threat to life. I'm talking factories with bottomless holes that pump out enough radiation the government has to build a nuclear dump site just to make a convincing cover. Although that is a bit of an extreme example. Most of the time, we just blame it on radon or meth fumes and condemn it. At this one place, a farmhouse where a family of 5 had lived for nearly 60 years. By the time I got there, the kids were adults and the parents had been dead for a while. The children had resisted selling the family home, tried to keep up with the payments, but they had their own debts, and in the end, the bank got its pound of flesh. At a glance, the house didn't look too bad. Bit run down, sure, but my standards are low. Cracked in low. Windows are intact, no graffiti, roof hadn't been stripped, satellite dish was still up. From where I sat in my car, gulping down a lukewarm bottle of water that had spent the drive tumbling around the passenger footwell, the house was relatively untouched by anything except nature and time. Something about that gave me pause. Shame I didn't listen to the gut feeling telling me it was all sorts of weird that an isolated house had gone undecayed for so long. I grabbed the keys the sheriff had given me and went inside, hoping for an easy gig. 3 hours later, and I was crawling out a kitchen window I'd smashed, the shirt and skin of my back cut to ribbons. I stumbled to my car, chest near bursting from the pounding of my heart, and my eyes fixed on the empty window frame I'd just escaped. A lone figure, barely visible, with a bright sun in my eyes, but still too substantial to be a mere ghost. My wounds were a testament to that. Once the doctor had finished patching me up, I sat in the waiting room and tried calling the former owners, the siblings, one after the other. I wanted to know what had attacked me. If anyone knew what I was walking into, there'd be hell to pay if so. The oldest son was the first to answer. I didn't go all in straight away. I asked probing questions, took my time before I mentioned the basement. The guy laughed when I brought it up, told me he hated going down there as a kid because he'd heard the weirdest noises, like someone moaning. They all thought a ghost lived down there in the dark, and to keep them from hurting themselves or playing around with stuff they shouldn't, their father had embellished this ghost, given it a name. Marion lived in the basement, hiding amongst the crates of old photos and clothes. She lurked behind the half-disassembled lawnmower, scuttling away to the dark places at the very edge of your eyesight. Marion had long fingernails and a haggard flour-sack dress. She had dark lips and a pointed nose and a wart the size of your thumb. Marion ate children, their dad had told them with glee. And if Marion knew there were 3 bite-sized kids living just above her, she'd come out of the basement and come crawling up the stairs with arms as long as her body, and she'd slink away into the bedrooms using the shadow as cover, and she'd start by taking tiny little bites out of any bare feet that lay dangling in the cold. "What about that freezer? Did you ever use it?" I asked. "Oh God, no," he said. "Even now that basement gives me the creeps, and that freezer was where Marion lived. Or so we figured as kids, so we stayed the hell away from it. It was just always there in the back, looking old and forgotten. I think Dad used to go hunting when we were little, and that's where he kept the meat. But he phased all that out before I turned 5. He seemed so sincere that I didn't tell him what I'd found in that house at the end of my inspection. He didn't know that behind that freezer was a false wall, and behind that false wall, basement number 2. Homemade. God knows how the father managed it with no one noticing, but he dug it out and made a private, soundproof space, hollowed out a room about the size of your typical jail cell. The furniture was threadbare, deliberately so. A single mattress propped up against one wall, an iron shackle bolted into the foundation. A dentist chair, modified with restraints. And a stain. A vague Rorschach blob of ancient browns and almost greens that pulled outwards from a patch in the corner. It had texture. I knew that stain. I'd seen it before. Residue left behind after the professionals have finished peeling a desiccated corpse off a hard surface. At first, I assumed someone had moved the source of that stain. There were even footprints. But they didn't look right. Something about them made me queasy. They'd not been left in the residue. They were made of it. Something or someone covered in that stuff had been stomping around down there. Until that moment, the inspection had been mundane and boring. But it isn't every day you stumble across a hidden dungeon. Now, I was suddenly presented with a hell of a family secret, and one that didn't quite make sense. I stood there for a good minute, trying to make the piece of that puzzle fit. Had someone moved a corpse and gotten covered in rotten flesh, then walked around leaving a trail? If so, why the hell had they done it barefoot? And why not clean up afterwards? And how had they been so clumsy, yet so clean as well? There were no drag marks. I took another look at those prints, and something inside my gut soured. Small feet. A woman's. We all know this story. Don't make me go over it. Basement out in the middle of nowhere, restraints, a family man that no one suspects. He'd hunted all right. Sicko. So, who had died in that basement, and who had left those prints? Not all of them were on the floor either. With an increasingly shaky hand, I tracked a few to the wall, where they mounted the vertical surface and continued upwards and onto the ceiling. Just like that, a cold sweat gathered on the back of my neck, and a powerful sense of the uncanny ran over me like icy water. Somewhere overhead, the wind blew, and the boughs of trees groaned in the yard. Sounds of another world. I could see it in my mind, up there, not far away. My car sitting in the shade. Those images felt like they belonged to another world, though. I desperately wanted to rejoin it, to leave this squalid little hole behind. All I had to do was walk out of that basement and make it for my car. Only, I wasn't so sure I wanted to move at all. Felt like I might break something brittle. The notion that the creeping dread I felt was all in my head, a product of an overactive imagination, nothing more. And yet, I got this feeling that if I tried to run, the nightmare would spill out into the real world and give chase. I even tried telling myself I didn't know what happened in that room, not for sure. It could have been a game, one played between him and the wife. But then I looked at the chair again, at the cracked and frayed leather of ancient straps. There were teeth marks on some of them. I took a deep breath and regained control of my legs. Unless I saw something alive down there, I had to assume I really was alone. So I turned and began to walk. Eyes forward, mind steeled against the myriad of little groans and creaks that felt as if they followed me, going from shadow to shadow. I couldn't stop myself from filling in the blanks of that basement's history, even as I told myself to stop. Maybe she died first. Maybe he did. Maybe he got bored and left her to starve. Or maybe he nearly got caught and decided to put an end to it all. Maybe she snuck something sharp and did it herself. But she died for sure, and she stayed dead a long time. At least a couple of months for that kind of liquefaction. She lost a lot of cohesion. Skin, muscle, blood, like the plug of mold that forms on top of forgotten coffee. I could see it in my head. Her collapse, the claymation time-lapse, a riot of colours. Only somehow the natural cycle broke. She didn't go away completely, and no one came to take her away. Those were her prints on the floor and walls and ceiling, weren't they? She lay down, she died, and then, somehow, she got back up. By the time I reached the top of the basement steps, I'd scared myself so bad that sweat was pouring off me. So far, the only things I'd seen on my way were just old boxes and crates and ancient bits of crap, weed whackers and leaf blowers with cobwebs and defunct logos fading away. But that didn't mean I was alone. There was something wrong with that place. I could feel it. A radiant heat, a palpable aura of hatred, even in the absence of anything seemingly real. It was so bad that as I opened the door, I actually felt a moment of childlike relief. A little like how you might feel racing back to bed after going to the toilet in the middle of the night, convinced some ghost was just inches behind you. I laughed. And something cold and hard wrapped around my ankle. A hand had reached up between the slats of the stairs, like it was reaching straight out of the world of make-believe and into this one where things are real. I stared down, heartbeat like thunder in my ears, and slowly began to process what I was seeing in bits and pieces. First was the hand. Gnarled, black, like a badly sketched shadow visible only because it caught the light coming through the open door. And then beneath it, in the shadow, a face like a skull wrapped in a garbage bag, the plastic pulled tight so you could see the suffocating outline of empty eyes and a gaping mouth. I'd expected something wetter, something straight out of a bad horror movie. In reality, whatever was in that basement had undergone a strange transformation. I only ever saw it in parts, so I can't say for sure what all of it was like, but it sure as hell didn't look like a ghost or a corpse or anything else I'd ever seen or thought I'd seen in life or movies. It looked like a monster, the real deal, and I reacted like a child seeing the boogeyman. I made some weird, half-muffled groan of fear and ripped my leg away so quickly that I surprised myself and got free. But whatever was hiding under those stairs was quick. Before I had time to take another step, it had left its hiding place, climbed the stairs, and was already driving me to the ground. The last thing I saw before my chin smashed into the kitchen floor was that Marion really did wear a flower sack dress. At the time, this strange detail passed over me without notice, but in hindsight, the fact that the son would later recount that particular item of clothing convinced me his father had been the man responsible for that hidden basement. It wasn't like it had been waiting undiscovered when the family moved in. And on top of that, the father must have been a real piece of crap to inject that sort of sickening detail into a story he told his kids. He'd likely done it so if his prisoner ever escaped and his kids saw her, their first instinct would be to scream for their lives and run. I didn't know any of this at the time, of course. I had only vague notions of what had attacked me. Something hateful for sure. Something that had died in that awful room and come back to life. God, she was so angry. She pinned me, knelt on my back, and howled like a banshee that had been hit by a car. I was terrified at the sound, at the feeling of helplessness, and the realization that this was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. She went to work on my back with fingers I couldn't see, but could feel as white-hot tattoo needle pain. It lasted only a few seconds. The agony was enough to send me into spasms that knocked her off and onto the floor. That tiny moment of freedom was all I needed. I crawled to my feet and jumped headfirst out the nearest window. I didn't give a damn about any cuts I might acquire. If you could have felt what I felt, you wouldn't have either. These weren't scratches. Doctors compared my wounds to those left by box jellyfish, the kind of thing that causes muscles beneath to wilt and wither after a million hypodermic needles have turned the flesh into porous sponge. I had to get skin grafts. I had to get rid of my car because they couldn't scrub what I'd left of my skin from the leather seats. Even now, my back looks like I got run over by a mower. Still hurts when I put my top on each morning. Somehow, they're not even the worst of my wounds. Just the biggest, the most visible. At least those scars made it easy to convince the bank not to sell. Normally, it takes a lot of effort, but they took one look at the doctor's reports and agreed to condemn it thoroughly. Pass the land onto whatever strange governmental department handles this kind of thing. That particular house had been left to crumble. No piece of paper or deed or mortgage payment is taking it back from Marion. We can only shut it off. The land is fenced, and every window has been slapped with so many toxic gas signs that I can only hope no one else is stupid enough to ever go back inside. Looking back, I really should have listened to my instincts. Squatters don't leave a place alone without good reason. Even though we lived in the projects, and even though it was just the two of us, my mum had to work constantly just to feed us. There was rent, bills, food, medical and credit card debt. She had a whole host of financial responsibilities that seemed to overshadow bonding time with her daughter, which, even as a kid, I understood. I learned at a very young age that the world revolves around money, and without money, you're going to end up on the worst end of things. That's how we ended up homeless and living with my aunt before we settled into Pinnacle Homes, and that's what she was trying to keep from happening ever again. Childcare wasn't really an option. It was too rich for our blood, and it was assumed I would be able to take care of myself by the age of 8. Maybe this is an anomaly for poor neighborhoods, but my routine was to be my own parent. I'd wake up, grab my lanyard with a key, put myself on the bus, take myself off the bus, do homework, fix dinner, clean a little, and go to bed. If Mum worked a double, which she often did between her 2 jobs, it'd seem like days before I'd see her. The only real parental structure I had was a list of rules on yellow legal paper that Mum would stick to the fridge every morning before she bolted off to her first job. Typically, the rules would stay the same, unless I messed something up that Mom needed to address, like not cleaning the kitchen after I cooked. But sometimes she'd make a new list with goofy little things written on them to try and make my day a little brighter. Nestled between "don't stay out past 7" and "no long distance calls" would be something dumb like "don't put coins in your ears" or "don't let fish swim backwards on Sundays." Most of them were pulled from dumb American laws she'd read about in one of her checkout line tabloids, but they gave me a giggle all the same. Then one day, I think I was maybe 9, I came home from school and checked the list. It was a new sheet of paper and a new colour of pen, so I was expecting something silly to be waiting for me. Her handwriting was rushed and lopsided, and most of it was exactly the same as the previous bunch of rules. The one exception was the joke rule, which didn't seem very funny. Don't talk to the new neighbour. I didn't get it. I also figured that maybe, judging from how horrid the handwriting looked, that she was in a rush, about to be late, and just bombed the delivery. After all, it had to be a joke of some kind since I hadn't seen anyone new in the neighbourhood. If we indeed had a new neighbour, I was pretty sure I'd catch wind of them or moving trucks or something when I went to and from the bus stop. I didn't think anything of it. I went about my normal routine. Mom worked late and came home after I went to bed, then slept straight through my alarm the next morning when I got up for school. We never crossed paths for me to ask for clarification, so I gave myself closure by checking the apartment to the left of us on my way out. I looked through the window and found it empty. Maybe that was the joke. Regardless, the weird note ended up forgotten somewhere in the middle of math lesson to make room for multiplication tables. A couple of days went by, and then, on my way back from the bus stop, I saw somebody on the sidewalk in front of our building that I'd never seen before. New faces in the projects aren't too strange since people are in and out all the time. But she stuck out like a sore thumb. Platinum blonde hair, bright scrubs, groceries in a paper bag tucked under her arm. She was young and didn't seem like she had any kids or anything. Definitely not the type of person that would qualify for Section 8. When she saw me coming out of the corner of her eye, she turned to me and turned on a smile that was better fit for a Colgate commercial. It caught me so off guard that it stopped me. She was slender and pretty, like the models in Mom's magazines, with hot pink lipstick and stunning blue eyes. Not an ounce of her looked like it belonged. "Oh, hello." Her voice sparkled as much as a smile. "Nice day today, isn't it?" Or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly what she said, aside from the fact it was an attempt at small talk, and kids suck at small talk, especially me. I stumbled over an answer, but managed to say something all the same, which was enough to please her. Her smile dissolved into a clueless expression soon after as her eyes scanned the numbers above the stoops, looking for an address. As I watched her, it never occurred to me she could be the new neighbour. She was dressed like a nurse, carrying groceries, and was a lot more put together than the people on my end of the road, me included. What I did figure was that she must have been a home health employee. Living to the right of us was an elderly woman named Miss Dorothy, who went through in-home nurses like most of us go through tissues. She was probably looking for her apartment, or was intentionally dragging her feet, since Miss Dorothy likely had a reputation for not being the most pleasant of people. I slipped past and trudged on home, right by the empty apartment where the lady was standing. I pulled out my lanyard and unlocked the door, and as soon as the lock clicked, I noticed she was staring at me. She looked concerned. Heck, she looked horrified. "Do you live here?" she asked. I smiled awkwardly. "Is your mom home?" she demanded. I shook my head. Yeah, this was definitely not somebody who lived here. Nobody questioned latchkey kids in our neighbourhood. You're alone? The fact she sounded so aghast made me a little afraid. Mom had always worried that somebody would report her to CPS for negligence one day, even though I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. My heart sank. I think it showed in my face. Oh, honey, no. Don't look at me like that. Just, if you need anything, let me know, okay? Okay, I whimpered. I'll be right next door, okay? My name is April. I nodded and went inside. I didn't check if April ever found a way to miss Dorothy. Days went by and CPS didn't come pounding on our door, so I figured April must have kept her mouth shut. We did cross paths pretty frequently though, since Miss Dorothy seemed to run April like she'd never run a nurse before. Whenever I come back home from school, April would be trudging down the sidewalk with bags from the Dollar General, and when I'd go outside to play, she'd be heading to her car. If I ran an errand to the corner store, April would usually be there too, buying cat food and milk and maybe a sandwich from the deli. Sometimes, if she was feeling generous and wasn't in much of a hurry, she'd buy me a sandwich too. If nothing else, we'd walk and talk at the same time. She told me my mom should think about getting a CNA license and told me that I was remarkable for such a young kid. In fact, she lavished me with praise, like she was shocked by the notion that precocious children existed. Then, one day, the list of rules on the fridge changed again. All of them were mundane, except one, written, bolded and underlined. Stay away from the new neighbor. Again, what new neighbor? On my way to school, I once again checked the empty apartment next to us. I got up on my tiptoes and looked in the window, and, sure enough, it was completely abandoned. Maybe Mum was pulling a long con on me to see how confused I could get before she'd give up and tell me it was a prank. I quickly forgot it and continued to pass my days making conversation with April, both when I'd leave for school and when I'd come trudging back home. Sometimes I'd just sit out on my stoop and we'd chat, usually about me and how I was faring. Very, very sparingly, she'd tell me about herself, but only insofar as her job was concerned. It was rare that she'd accidentally let slip a few details about her personal life, like how her boyfriend left her, how she moved into a new apartment, and that she had some nondescript pet named Jade. I didn't know if Jade was a dog or a cat, but I guessed cat based on the pet food she'd buy at the corner store. Time ticked on. The note on the fridge never changed, barring the orders to not talk to the neighbor being circled a couple more times. I didn't bother to ask Mum about it the few times I'd seen her, seeing as I'd written it off as a bad prank by that point. She never brought it up either, so it seemed like the whole thing was dead in the water. Spring break sprang up on us, and even though I usually got to see Mom a little more often during school breaks, she picked up a third job to help fund my birthday gift. It happened occasionally. She had a habit of worrying about me feeling left out and would pick up extra work to get me something, quote, all of the other kids had. That year, it was an N64, which, while exciting, also meant I would be completely alone for the week. No friends, no school, no Mom. Just 7 whole days of seeing her only if we got up to pee at the same time during the night. I was mostly a hermit, so I didn't see April much either. It was too rainy to go play outside for half the week, and it was too much effort to get up off the couch beyond that. The only time I saw her was after a few days of silence, when there was a knock on the door. It took me by surprise. We never had visitors, but a quick glimpse through the peephole eased my fears. She had a bin of clothes tucked under her arm. Her hair was a little disheveled. She asked if I was okay and if I was enjoying my break, then explained that the washer and dryer next door had spontaneously stopped working. The laundry desperately needed done. Not an exaggeration. I could smell it from where I stood, and she wanted to know if she could come in and use ours real quick. Sure, why not? I was supposed to avoid the imaginary new neighbour, not Miss Dorothy's home health nurse. I offered to help her load everything, or to even do it for her. Both times she told me no, but she didn't begrudge me standing behind her while she dumped everything into the washer. She didn't bother to sort, and I figured it had something to do with her limited time, the overpowering smell of something fetid, and the brown smears all over everything. My stomach turned, but I figured maybe Miss Dorothy had an accident. After all, if I learned anything from television, it was that old people needed diapers. April stuck around for a few minutes, just long enough to marvel at how clean I kept the place. But the longer she lingered, the more uneasy I became. I don't know why, but there was just something jarring about someone being in the apartment while Mom wasn't there. It slowly dawned on me. I didn't really know this woman at all, and she was being awfully curious about everything, prodding around like she was looking for a sign of weakness. My first instinct was that she was looking for a definitive reason to call CPS, but even that didn't feel wholly right. I just felt uncomfortable. So I told her I wasn't supposed to let strangers in the house, and nervously, passive-aggressively implied she should leave. She was fine with it, but on her way past the kitchen to the front door, she caught a glimpse of the note Mom wrote me. Her brows furrowed and her nose crinkled, but despite the look of disgust, she laughed. I knew she probably saw the part about not talking to the new neighbour first, given how it was circled and underlined. Maybe she thought Mom was overprotective. As soon as she walked out the door, I closed it, locked the chain, and told her through the gap that I'd put everything in the dryer and bring it to her once it was done. I also begged her not to tell my mom I let her in. I didn't really give her an opportunity to answer before I closed the door, locked the locks, and decided to meditate in front of the television. But I was a kid of my word. Right as my nerves began to settle in the warm embrace of an afternoon of Nicktoons, the buzzer for the washer went off. Then, an hour later, the dryer. It took a strange amount of courage to pick up the laundry bin once everything was folded and fresh, but I was committed to being a responsible kid and told April I'd bring everything to her. I grabbed the laundry, my lanyard, locked the door on my way out, and walked a whole 2 yards to Miss Dorothy's. I knocked. No answer. Maybe April was at the corner store. I looked around, waited a few minutes, then knocked again with the same result. Annoyed, I pounded a little harder, on the verge of calling for April herself, when I heard the chain scratching against the other side. The door opened, and a man stood in the doorway. He was tall, stubbly, in powder blue scrubs. He was holding a syringe, like I'd interrupted something. At first he looked angry, then confused, then worried when he noticed that I was just as bewildered as him. If I squinted into the dark behind him, I could see Miss Dorothy in a living room, seated in a recliner. She glared at me. Nobody knew why there was some idiot kid standing on their stoop with a bunch of clothes. When I asked for April, he seemed lost. I tried to explain that April was Miss Dorothy's home health nurse, and he replied that he was Miss Dorothy's home health nurse and had been for over a month. No, there wasn't anyone named April who covered for him on his days off, and no, nobody had been by Miss Dorothy's apartment except him that day. The more I pressed, the more concerned he seemed to get. After taking a moment to ditch the needle, he came back to ask for more details. What did she look like? Where did I meet her? Was there anyone else in the neighborhood who may have had in-home care? I blinked tears of embarrassment out of my eyes as I answered. He told me he wished he could be of more help before apologizing and closing the door. I trundled away, laundry in hand. Embarrassment became fear. I kept thinking back to how odd I felt while April was in the apartment, and my heart beat faster. When we first met, she said if I needed anything, she'd be right next door. But one apartment was empty, and she didn't work for Miss Dorothy after all. Faster still, April was just some stranger, and everything she told me seemed to be lies. But what was she getting out of lying to some kid? I walked straight past my apartment to the vacant one next door, and, climbing up on my tiptoes, peeked in the window yet again. Empty. It was still empty. I left the laundry on the stoop anyway, and sprinted back home. I locked the doors, I locked the windows, I ran up to my bedroom and locked myself in. To add one more layer of security between me and April, I climbed into my closet and pulled it shut. And there I stayed, vowing not to move until Mom came home from work. There was a part of me who was convinced April was some kind of ghost, and that the evening would end like a horror movie. A more sensible part of my brain tried to justify things however it could. When my mom and I first moved into the projects, we didn't have any furniture and I just slept on blankets in the floor. So maybe April was just rebounding from a bit of bad luck. It was also possible that the first day we met, she misspoke and she actually lived 2 apartments away, maybe 3. Maybe saying she was right next door was meant figuratively and not literally. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, I started hearing knocking from downstairs. On the door, on the windows, and I swear, it was creeping closer. The walls were thin in certain places, so I kept trying to figure out if the footsteps I was hearing on the stairs were in my apartment or Miss Dorothy's, or if the banging I was hearing on the walls was maintenance working on the vacant apartment or somebody trying to flush me out. I curled up in a ball and held my breath, sitting on the floor of my closet and rationalizing my fears. Until I heard something. In my room. Not a person, not a banging sound, not even a voice. There was someone jostling the doorknob quietly, which I almost convinced myself was me accidentally knocking into something, and then a quieter noise. It was the sound of paper being slid under a door. My closet had slats, so if I angled my head correctly, I could actually see some of the note on my bedroom floor. It was on yellow legal paper, just like my mom's notes. Maybe it was Mom. As quietly as I could, I slid the closet door open and silently slipped out to fetch it. It was written in hurried scrawls and looked like Mom's rushed writing. But it wasn't a list. It was just a word. Hello. I froze as I realized that I felt like I was being watched, and that the gap beneath my door was high enough to look into the room. The idea that the note had been bait flashed in my mind as I pressed my head down on the floor and worked up the courage to look under the door and into the hallway, right dead into the sparkling blue eye of April. I could even see the corner of a smile, bright and white and ready for Aquafresh prime time. Our gazes met, her eyes widened like a cat about to pounce. She pushed the weight into the door. Gotcha, sweetie. I screamed and pounded against the wall between mine and Miss Dorothy's apartment, wailing and shrieking. I stomped and yelled and fumbled for anything heavy enough to do some damage. As I heard April putting all of her weight on a door that I was sure wouldn't hold, I threw open my window and shrieked into the ether for help. April, silent, kept throwing herself at the barrier between us. When I heard the first snap, I took a look down from the window and to the roof over our stoop. It was small, slanted, and too far away to be a safe jump. But it was still safer than launching myself all the way down to the concrete. Without overthinking it, I pulled myself out into the evening air, tumbled down and clasped to whatever I could to keep myself from rolling the rest of the way down. The shingles were rough, like asphalt, and I felt the road burn forming on my shoulder. I felt something snap in one of my wrists, but adrenaline is a hell of a thing when you think you're about to be murdered. I didn't see April leave, as distracted as I was trying not to fall. I just balanced the best I could where I was, and wailed and cried and screamed until Miss Dorothy's actual nurse burst out of the apartment. He tried desperately to calm me down, telling me he'd call the police as soon as I started yelling and promising he'd find a way to get me down. He tried to calm me enough that I'd tell him where my mum worked so he could call her too, but I couldn't stop hyperventilating long enough to speak. The next few days were a blur. Somehow, my mom got away with leaving me at home by myself, and I think it may have been the home health nurse's doing. I remember people asking a lot of questions, but I really didn't know anything about April aside from what she looked like and the fact she had been dumped and had a pet named Jade. Faces started blending together, time became meaningless, and I remember more about going to a kindly child's therapist after all was said and done than I remember the actual outcome. It's like everything was blotted painlessly out of my mind before I reached adulthood. This would normally be where the story concludes, an anticlimactic end with no resolution. There wouldn't really be a reason to tell it, at least not on this grand of a scale. Hell, I probably wouldn't have even remembered to talk about it, period, if not for my mom. She had a very close call with ovarian cancer this past year, which loosened the lips about quite a few old stories about when she was a kid, I was a kid, or weird things about our family. Maybe it's her attempt to bring closure to us both. Either way, it's the reason that, apropos of nothing, she nonchalantly asked me if I remembered April the other day. Apparently, I didn't recall a lot of the aftermath because Mom specifically went out of her way to keep me from finding out about it. She knew I wouldn't be thrilled with the fact that April was never caught, for instance. She had made a beeline out of the back door while everyone was distracted and never came back. She also guessed I wouldn't have taken it well if I'd known the notes, including the neighbor rule, didn't come from her. She'd actually stopped rewriting the rules because she figured I knew them well enough, so the notes had probably been written by April. The police investigation found that April had been letting herself in for a while, courtesy of a fault in a window that maintenance apparently knew about and never disclosed. Even if you locked it, it would be open. So, during the night, she would sneak in, going through our stuff, potentially leaving notes. Nobody is sure what the notes were supposed to accomplish, but they're pretty sure it was a part of some kind of grooming attempt or scare tactic. Or maybe she was just crazy and they had no purpose. That's Mom's theory. Additionally, the empty apartment next to us wasn't empty at all. According to the Housing Authority's records, as well as the rumour mill and the local news, it was rented out to somebody named April Gallant, who police figured out pretty quickly didn't actually exist. This woman managed to get into state housing using an assumed name and fake information, and even claimed to have a daughter. Mom never found out who the daughter was, but she had her suspicions. You see, when they inspected the apartment, behind a locked door in an unfinished upstairs bedroom, they found the remains of a little girl, around my age. She hadn't been dead long, probably shortly after April allegedly moved in, but she seemed to have been beaten in the past and was so malnourished that she was basically a skeleton. Dark skin, dark hair. She definitely didn't seem like somebody who'd be related to a blonde, blue-eyed girl. And after what happened with me, they concluded that the girl had been a victim of abduction. They looked for anything they could that would help with identification, but the only thing they found in the room with her was an empty bowl, cans of dried up cat food, and a collar with tags hanging on the closet. Unsurprisingly, the collar was their best lead. They're still looking for anyone missing a child named Jade. Rural Iowa had its fair share of slow days. The small town I worked in made you second guess whether anything ever really happened here. My radio crackled to life that evening, breaking the long lull of the silence. "Officer, you there?" It was Bill Hastings, a farmer whose land stretched for miles past the town limits. Salt of the earth kind of guy. Steady, not prone to dramatics. If he was calling, it wasn't for nothing. "I think my neighbors are missing." I let out a breath, rubbing my temple. "Who?" "The Barnes family. I ain't seen them in 2 weeks. Thought maybe they'd gone on vacation, but the house is all lit up, same as it was last night. Livestock still penned up, car still there. Something ain't right." The Barnes family. I knew them, or at least I knew of them. A quiet, unremarkable household. They never caused any trouble, at least not to my knowledge. Married couple, 2 kids, always polite at the grocery store, always smiling at church. You'd think they came straight from the normal Rockwell paintings. Not the kind of people you worried about. Maybe they left in a hurry, could have had a family emergency. "Maybe," Bill said, but he didn't sound convinced. I wasn't either. I assured him I'd check it out, then pulled my cruiser onto the highway, heading west. The drive was long, the scenery monotonous. Expanses of golden fields rolling endlessly in every direction, wind turbines slowly turning like skeletal sentinels on the horizon. The deeper I went, the fewer signs of life I saw. Fewer homes, fewer cars, just empty stretches of farmland and the occasional crow perched on a fence post. As I turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to the Barnes property, a thin mist had begun to creep over the fields, swirling in the wake of my headlights. The sun had started dipping below the horizon, bleeding deep oranges and purples into the sky, stretching shadows long across the land. The house was lit up like a beacon in the dark. Every window glowed with warm, golden light, like a dollhouse staged for no one in particular. I killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing in around me. The wind had picked up, rustling the cornstalks that stood at the property's edge, their dry leaves whispering like unseen voices. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the cruiser. The wind had died down now, leaving the air heavy and still. Even the insects had gone quiet. There was a car in the driveway. I came closer and inspected the old Ford. The tires were sunken into the ground below it, like it had been sitting there for quite some time now. Something about that bothered me. A family this out the way would make trips to stores and work frequently. I adjusted my belt, resting one hand on the holster at my hip as I stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath my weight. I knocked twice. "Mr. Barnes, Mrs. Barnes." No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. I glanced at the windows. The curtains were drawn, revealing nothing. I tried the doorknob. Unlocked. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. A faint smell of cooked meat and something vaguely herbal. Rosemary, maybe, hung in the air. At first glance, everything looked normal. The floors were pristine. No dust, no muddy boot prints from the farm, no signs of movement. Everything was placed perfectly, cozy but sterile. I stepped inside, pulled the door shut behind me. The silence felt thick. I called out again. My voice didn't echo. The house swallowed sound. I moved carefully through the hallway, my boots making barely a whisper on the polished wood. Nothing was out of place. No sign of a break-in, or at least not so far. But the lights were on. The house was warm. Someone had to have been here recently. Then I stepped into the dining room, and I stopped cold. The Barnes family sat around the table, mother, father, 2 children, their heads bowed forward, hands folded neatly on the wooden surface, motionless. The food in front of them was untouched, but fairly fresh. I felt my pulse kick up. My first instinct was to move forward, to check their pulses, to say something. But I didn't. Something held me in place. A pressure, a weight in the air, like I'd stepped into something that wasn't meant to be seen. I forced myself to take a slow step forward. I looked around the room, and above me, carved into the ceiling above the dinner table, deep, uneven gashes in the wood, was a pentagram. I took a slow step forward toward the table, my pulse hammering in my ribs. 4 people, but there were 5 plates. I hadn't noticed it at first, not until my eyes landed on the empty chair. The plate was set perfectly, so like all the others, but no one was sitting there. I swallowed hard and looked at the bodies again, forcing my breath to steady. I had to be sure. I approached the father first, reaching out to his wrist. His skin was cool, stiff, no pulse. His head remained bowed. I did the same to the mother. The same result. The kids too. They were dead. I forced myself to stand straight, stepping back from the table, my body itching with something I couldn't place. I needed to call this in as soon as possible. I clicked my radio, voice tight. "This is Officer Brims. I need backup at the Barnes property. 4 deceased, no signs of struggle, but something isn't right." Static crackled, then the dispatcher's voice came through, calm but firm. "Copy that, Brims. Nearest unit is 25 minutes out." I let out a slow breath, rubbing the bridge of my nose. 25 minutes. An eternity in a house like this. My hand steadied on my belt. I had a choice. I could wait outside until backup arrived, or I could keep looking. I glanced back at the empty chair. I needed to check the rest of the house. The first floor was pristine. There was no dust on the shelves, no dishes in the sink, no coats by the door, no toys left scattered in the den. Not a single sign of daily life. Even the refrigerator, when I opened it, was full. Fresh groceries, nothing spoiled. This, at least on the surface, did not seem like a house that had gone through internal turmoil. In fact, it seemed like they'd been living just fine until the very moment I had stepped in. I clenched my jaw and turned toward the stairs. I needed to check the second floor. As I moved toward them, my boots felt too loud against the hardwood. The air felt thicker. I noticed the first few steps seemed more used than the rest of them. They were cracked, their edges smoothed out as if they'd been used 1,000 times. I climbed the first step, then the second. I half expected something to stop me, but nothing did. I made my way to the second floor slowly, and that was when I saw the first sign that this house wasn't as spotless as it seemed. The upstairs wasn't like the first floor. The hallway stretched before me, long and narrow, lined with doors on either side. The illusion of a perfect home was breaking. Whereas the first floor was maintained to perfection, this one looked like it hadn't seen a visitor in quite some time. Dust had settled along the baseboards. The air smelled faintly damp, like wood left to rot in an old attic. The doors were all shut, but some had small gaps where they hadn't been pulled fully closed. And then I saw it. A framed photograph sitting on the hallway table. It shouldn't have caught my attention the way it did, but something about it immediately made my stomach tighten. I stepped closer. It was the Barnes family, seated at the dinner table, just as I had found them downstairs. But there was something else in the picture. My fingers twitched as I reached for it. The fifth chair was not empty. There was something sitting in it. A mass of flesh, warped, uneven, grotesque and small. Not a person. It had the vague shape of a child, but its limbs were swollen, bulbous, unnatural. The flesh looked stretched too tight, bulging in places like something beneath the skin was pressing outward, desperate to escape. The family was beaming, teeth bared, eyes wide. I carefully placed the photograph back down. I passed a few closed doors, kids' rooms mostly. They could wait. At the end of the hall, one door stood slightly open. The master bedroom. The second I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Copper. Thick, sharp, unmistakable. Blood. A lot of it. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes landed on the bed. You see a lot of things as a police officer, but each and every gore scene hits just like the first. You never get used to seeing death, or even a place where something had once died. It leaves a permanent mark. The sheets, the mattress, even the floor beneath it, all soaked through, dark and wet. The stain had spread far beyond the doorframe, creeping outward in a pattern that made my skin crawl. But there was no body or sign of a struggle, just a pool of blood and the overwhelming, sickening reality that someone had bled out here. I stepped forward, careful not to let my boots sink too deep into the carpet. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to turn back, to wait for backup. But I suppressed them. I always did. I needed to understand. I turned my attention to the nightstand. A small, black, leather-bound book sat there, open, waiting. A journal. I picked it up, flipping back to the first few pages. March 4th. We lost him. We lost him. We lost him. We lost him. The doctor said it was quick, that it wasn't painful, but how would they know? They don't know what his last breath sounded like. They don't know how his fingers felt when they went limp in mine. They don't know how his eyes looked, staring at me, but not seeing me. I can't do this. I can't. The rest of the page was scratched out violently. Deep black ink slashed through the words, rendering them unreadable. March 14th. I found something. I think it will work. I searched everywhere, Hospitals, therapists, grief support groups, even church. But no one had answers. No one had what I needed. But I found it, guided by the grace of the holy, tucked away in a library archive, in a book older than the town itself. I read the passage a dozen times, my fingers shaking over the page. To unbury the lost, the body must be claimed, the name must be called, the invitation must be set. The flesh will answer, if the will is strong enough. I don't understand it fully yet, but I will. March 17th. I went to his grave today. March 19th. The others don't understand. They say I'm losing myself, that I need help, that I need to stop obsessing and focus on the children I still have. They don't understand. If this was one of them, I would never tell them to stop searching. I went back to the grave tonight. I dug. March 29th. It's working. He's come back. I feel him stronger now. He's getting closer, but I don't think he knows how to come home yet. The book says the final steps requires an offering, something from us, something of flesh. It doesn't say how much, but I think I understand now. We will do whatever it takes. April 1st. Tomorrow is the final step. The table is set, the house is prepared, the offering is ready. I can feel him waiting. We will welcome him home. April 2nd. It worked. He came back. We are whole again. I let the journal slip from my fingers. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding shuddered out of me. I looked back toward the blood-soaked bed. They had done something here. That mass I'd seen in the picture crawled back into my mind. Was that the child they had brought back? Downstairs, a door creaked open. I froze. For a split second, I thought I had imagined it. Then, a noise followed. A low, wet, rattling breath that pushed through the entire home. My grip on my gun tightened. The air shifted, not just in the room, everywhere. The walls groaned like old bones flexing. The wooden beams above me settled with a deep, unnatural creak. I heard something shudder through the house, not from a single direction, but all around me. I took a step toward the door, gun raised. My boots felt too loud on the floor. A disgusting version of a baby's voice. It wasn't normal, not an actual baby's voice. It was low, warped, deep and slow, like something trying to mimic a baby's voice, but failing. Then the entire house shook. It started with a violent tremor beneath my feet. Just one, sudden and forceful, like something massive had shifted below the foundation. The light bulb in the ceiling flickered. Then, from downstairs, I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. The plates clattered softly, as if something had just sat down. A deep, nauseating instinct crawled up my spine. My fingers ached from how tightly I gripped my gun. I kept it leveled in front of me, moving slowly. "This is Officer Brims. If anyone is here, make your presence known," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. No response followed. I descended the stairs, one step at a time, the wood groaning beneath my weight. There was a smell now I hadn't noticed before. Damp rot and decay. I reached the bottom step. Ahead, past the archway, was the dining room. I couldn't see the table yet, but I could hear it. Wet chewing, smacking lips, heavy, laboured breathing. Something was sitting there, and it sounded like it was eating. I rounded the corner. Sitting at the table, hunched over a plate of untouched food, was the thing. A baby, but not a baby. It was massive. It bulged and pulsed, its flesh stretched too tight over a swollen, shifting form. The skin was pale and slick, streaked with purple veins, quivering as if something underneath was trying to break free. Its arms were thick and meaty, with fingers that ended in blunt, bloated stubs. It was bigger than it was in the picture. Much bigger, assuming it was the same thing. It shoveled food into its mouth, gnashing hungrily, slurping and swallowing, grease smearing across its wet, sagging lips. I could hear it swallowing, thick, heavy gulps, like it was trying to fill an endless void. The chair beneath it creaked, cracked. The wooden frame sank into the floor beneath its impossible weight. It was too large to sit properly, too swollen to move. It was stuck here, on the first floor. That's why the second floor was in the condition it was in. And then, it stopped. Its hand froze over the plate, mid-motion, its slack mouth stilled, the gnashing of teeth ceasing instantly. The silence rippled through the room. Then, its head began to turn, slowly. The movement was unnatural, mechanical, like the muscles in its neck weren't working correctly. The flesh at the side of its throat rippled, as if something inside was rearranging itself. And then, it saw me. Its black, soulless eyes locked onto mine. It opened its mouth to scream. The sound that came out wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was wet, gurgling, thick, like something drowning in its own throat. A bubbling, choking howl that ripped through my eardrums. The plate shook on the table, the lights flickered. Then, it lunged. The table snapped beneath it, splintering into shards of wood as its enormous, bloated body surged forward. I fired. A direct hit sent a mass, then another. The gunshots roared through the house, deafening, and it didn't stop. The bullets sank into its flesh like mud, disappearing with thick, wet plops like I'd fired into a rotten, swollen carcass. It didn't flinch. I ran. I turned on my heel and bolted through the archway, my boots slamming against the floor, breath ragged. Behind me, I could hear it moving, sliding, dragging, breaking things as it followed. Walls groaned, the house shuddered. I didn't look back, entirely focused on creating distance. I barreled down the hall, past the stairs toward the front door, and the moment my fingers touched the doorknob, the entire house shook violently once more, like something huge had struck it from the inside. The windows shattered, the lights burst into sparks, the walls buckled. From the outside, flashes of red and blue adorned the walls of the house, tires screeching. Backup had arrived. I felt it, right behind me. My body froze for a split second, and just then, gunfire erupted all around me. A deafening barrage of bullets and shotgun blasts tore through the walls, the windows, the thing itself. It screamed. Not like before. This time, it was different. It wasn't the gurgling, childlike noise I'd heard in the dining room. This was primal, like something realizing for the first time that it could be hurt. And so I raised my own weapon and shot every bullet I had. Glass rained down as the windows exploded outward, the walls buckled inward like the entire structure was caving in on itself. I hit the floor just as the thing convulsed. A massive, bulging body rippled, as if the flesh itself was trying to crawl away from the bullets. But the officers kept firing. Round after round, shot after shot, the air filled with smoke, gunpowder, and the acrid stench of burning flesh. The thing shuddered, twitched, spasmed, and then it collapsed. Its enormous form sagged, crumpling into itself like a rotten pumpkin left too long in the sun. The house gave one last deep, sickening groan. I lay on my back, panting, staring at the ceiling as the dust settled. Someone grabbed my arm, yanking me up. "Brims, geez, are you alright?" I turned toward the voice. It was Officer Delgado, wide-eyed, mouth open in shock, his rifle still half raised. I stood up and made my way out without saying a word to anyone. I sat in my cruiser, still covered in soot, dried sweat, and something I didn't want to name. The lead investigator, a man I'd never seen before that morning, with greying hair, a stiff suit, and eyes too tired to still be sharp, stood next to me, watching the flames consume what was left of the Barnes home. He took a long drag of his cigarette, exhaled, and then turned to me. "Forget this ever happened." The cleanup started before the sun even rose. By the time the first hints of dawn broke over the fields, the house was already a husk. Hollowed out, emptied, stripped of everything that tied it to what had happened inside. No bodies were taken out, no coroner's reports, just unmarked black trucks rolling in, men in plain uniforms moving with eerie precision, officers who wouldn't look me in the eye. The Barnes family was buried within the hour, and the house was burned to the ground. The newspaper printed a quiet obituary, something about a tragic accident, a gas leak, a whole family gone, just like that. Like whatever was inside it needed to be erased, scorched from the land, the very dirt salted so nothing could ever take root there again. Years have passed, and I've buried more cases than I can count. But this one stayed. It's a nasty habit, but I've been smoking again. Pretty heavily, honestly. It started because I was bored. Stupid, I know. And it developed from there. I live alone and suffer from that. I don't have enough energy to do anything productive, but I want to feel productive, and sitting on the porch smoking counts as doing something, right? Again, it's stupid and doesn't make much sense. I keep saying I'll quit, but here I am at 6 a.m, sitting on my porch with a cigarette lit, not even 5 minutes after the alarm woke me. I live in a rural area on the border of a state park and Route 30. There's a little apartment above the little country market here. If it weren't for the intermittent traffic, it would be a quiet home. 6 a.m. was one of the few times I could sit on the porch and not hear the constant stream of trucks and semis hauling things across state. If I was lucky, I'd catch glimpses of some wildlife though. Raccoon, deer, once even a bear that made eye contact with me as it steadily resumed its rummaged meal from the dumpster beneath the parking lot. And that more than made up for the noise, I think. I like to think that I always had a friend or two nearby. Kinda pathetic really, but I failed to make any human friends in 2 years of living here. Another thing is the spiders. Tons of them make their home on the porch's railings and the ceiling of the overhang above. They freak me out a little, the sheer mass of them, but I like to think we have a truce of sorts. They don't try to crawl on me or take up real estate on my chair and respect my personal space. They don't get smashed or bathed in a torrent of raid. It's been working well so far, and I thank them for the cooperation, because it's totally normal to have one-sided conversations with the spiders or whatever other creature crawls into my line of sight. I was finishing my 3rd cigarette when I noticed it. Stuck in a particularly nasty series of webs was a praying mantis, dangling from one leg. It was a pretty large one too, green and tan with wings tipped in bright white, which I'd never seen before. I was sure it could take on the comparatively little spiders on the porch, but its frantic arm movements struck a chord in my heart. I carefully removed the little thing from the web, and it almost immediately latched on with its front legs. It took over a minute to release its grip as carefully as I could, as I feared harming its delicate limbs. I set it down on my chair gently. "Seat of honor right there," I said, but frowned when I saw the mantis didn't seem to be doing well despite my efforts. It had its face pressed to the seat, limbs splayed as if they could no longer support its body weight. As I watched, it struggled to move, legs uncoordinated. It flipped onto its back, where it grew mostly still except for the slow movements of legs bending and unbending. A pang of sadness hit me, probably more than what is normal for the life of a bug, but I didn't know what to do. I whispered an apology to it, then went back inside to get ready for work. When I went to leave, it hadn't moved at all. Its colour seemed to be more muted. "Good luck, buddy. If nothing else, I hope you can pass comfortably there instead of a spider's meal." I passed to go to my car and thought about the mantis the entire way and throughout the day. I felt worried, and maybe even a little stupid for feeling worried, but it occupied my mind all day. Every break I could, I took to Google. I found that the mantis was likely female due to its larger size and the length of its wings, which did not extend past its abdomen. I also read up on the molting process, which gave me a little hope. It listed a lightening in colour and lethargy as signs of the process. I continued my research in stolen minutes during smoke breaks and bathroom breaks. I wasn't able to determine the exact species, the white-tipped wings throwing off any hunch that it could be similar green and tan species. It was much larger than the average size of any mantises known in my area too. Its length had dwarfed my hand in the brief moments I held it. I figured it might have been some sort of one-off mutation of sorts. I got home from work a little late after stopping for groceries along the way. It was still there. I went inside long enough to put groceries away, lighting up a cigarette as I stepped outside and holding a dining chair with me, so I had a place to sit too. I studied her, looked as close as I could, and was happy to see light movement. Not much, but her antenna was still twitching and mouthpieces quivering just very slightly. I butted out the cigarette and went back inside the house, returning with a cup of water. I went off the porch to find the leaf, slightly dry, slightly curled up at the edges. I set the leaf about 6 inches away from her. I used my fingertips to transfer a few droplets of water to the leaf. I searched around the porch, examining the spider webs, and picked up a medium-sized moth. I apologized to the spiders for stealing a meal, reassured them that it was for a good cause, then set the mostly dead but still twitching moth next to the leaf. I don't know if this will help, but if you pull through, at least you'll have a drink and a snack when you do. The mantis, as expected, did not answer. Not much for conversation, that one. I went back inside, thinking my presence might be a continued stress on her. I didn't smoke the rest of the night, but looked out the door every so often. As time went on, I was happy to see that it had been a molting process after all, as she seemed to be detaching from the old exoskeleton little by little in small, laboured movements. In the morning, the moth was gone, the dry leaf, and nothing left of her but a shed and destroyed moult, and a surprising amount of clear, viscous goo, and a lot of it. My Google Academy session had nothing to say about the goo, but I was just glad she had made it through and was off living a little mantis life again somewhere. I smiled and left for work. Another few weeks passed in its usual silence and lack of fanfare. I found myself smoking more, as if I needed an excuse to sit out on my porch more often than before. In the back of my head, I hoped to see her again, see how bright her new colours were and how big she had grown. It was dumb, what with a large expansive forest surrounding me, hundreds of acres she could be exploring and hunting. Still, it was a nice thought. Monday nights or trash nights, the dumpster emptied early Tuesday mornings. I'd fallen asleep at some point on my couch, and when I woke up, it was still dark. I looked at the time. 5 a.m. Grumbling, I bagged up my trash, deciding to take it out before the dump truck arrived, and with plans to get another hour of sleep in before work. The parking lot light was a bright orange-white above as I lifted the dumpster lid and threw the bag inside, the movement casting distorted shadows as I did. It was after I turned to go back inside that I heard movement. Before I could even react or think about it, something hard and pointed pressed painfully into the small of my back. I didn't know anybody was still here, a rough, out-of-breath male voice said. I froze, too afraid to even look over my shoulder in fear of setting the guy off. He sounded panicked himself, pressing the knife further against my back. For once, I begged for the usual noisy traffic along 30, but the night was quiet and the road unoccupied at this hour. Please, I begged, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to die here, sad and alone, with the only old woman who worked in the country market there to find me. Let me go. I haven't seen your face. I don't even... What was he even doing to warrant worry about a sad, lonely woman living by herself? I glanced around quickly and noted the window below my apartment for the country market was open. Of all places to try to rob, it had to be a little store in the middle of nowhere. I was going to die here, so out of the blue and unexpected, and in a place so small it didn't even have a paper for me to be remembered as a passing headline. A place where no one would mourn me or claim my body when it was found. I could sense him shifting from foot to foot nervously. Nah, I'm not. I can't risk it. I can't. He hovered behind me for several long moments, knife alternating between pressing even harder into my back, hesitant and pulling away. My porch steps were about 20 feet away. Could I make it in time? Up my steps and through the door, locking it before he could push through and make a more decisive jab of his knife? Probably not. Not with all the smoking I've been doing. Our shadows stretched ahead of us, made grotesque from the angle of the parking lot light. As I watched and considered my fate here at the hands of an indecisive knife, something else in the shadow shifted behind us. Now, an even longer and larger shadow crept up, swallowing up the shadows of myself and my assailant until all you could see was this new shadow. The man cursed, the knife pulling away as he turned to the shuffling steps behind us. I didn't hesitate then, his distraction my benefit. I bolted for my steps, taking them 2 at a time, but not quick enough to avoid hearing the man's screams being abruptly cut off by an echoing, wet crunch. I didn't look back. I crashed through my door, locked it, and made the beeline for my bed where I huddled, terrified and in a disassociated daze as the sun rose and the morning light spilled in through my window. It must have only been an hour, tops, before a commotion outside began, first with the sound of the garbage truck pulling up, and then the sirens and more cars and a chorus of voices, then knocking on my door. 2 officers stood there, the lights of their vehicles flashing below. "Morning, ma'am. Are you the one who lives here?" I nodded, heart hammering in my chest. My mind immediately went to every worst-case scenario, because of course something else could go wrong. My mind landed on the idea that I'd somehow be blamed for the man's death. I assumed he was dead, because those screams and their quick end could mean nothing else. Did you happen to hear anything in the night? Any unusual activity? But the two stood shoulder to shoulder and blocked the view. No, not that I can recall, I lied. Why did I lie? I was out like a light since 10. They accepted the answer easily. I was surprised with how calmly I was interacting with them, despite the terror in my head. Did something happen, officers? They exchanged glances briefly, but didn't hesitate in their reply. Word gets around in places like this, whether they told me themselves or not. Looks like a particularly bad bear attack. Guy trying to rob the store below and was in the wrong place at the wrong time, the first officer said. Not the first bear attack around here, said the second. I nodded again, not sure what to say now. All right, the first officer said after a long pause. Well, stay safe, keep on the lookout for wildlife, and be careful not to leave trash out near your door or steps. They turned and descended the stairs just in time for me to glimpse the body, covered in blood in a flimsy sheet that hugged the outline of the body. Tall, broad-shouldered, and alarmingly ended right there at the shoulders. I shut the door, called off work, and stayed inside. No smoke breaks. The next day, I returned to work, not able to justify another missed day of wages to myself. Talk at work confirmed what I saw. The man's head had been taken clean off, leaving only the collapsed body in the parking lot. The head was nowhere to be found. Nobody knew the man, but an abandoned campsite was found in the park nearby. Bear must have had one hell of the munchies, one co-worker said. Too bad the store security cameras were just for show. Would have liked to see the thieving asshole get what was coming to him. I stayed quiet. When I got home that day, I sat on my porch in my usual chair and lit a cigarette with a lot of unease. I looked out toward the dumpster and the parking lot light, not yet flicked on in the fading sunlight. I thought about the shadow that dwarfed mine and the man's. The long, gangly limbs, the thin body above the larger, rounded abdomen, the triangular head and the moving mouthpiece. I didn't want to understand yet. I made my retreat into the house when a spider crawled onto my shoulder and down the front of my shirt, sending my limbs flailing as I tried to get it off. Several weeks passed and the excitement of the bear attack eventually faded. I felt okay enough to keep up my normal smoking habits out on the porch after a few days. I also made a habit of not descending the stairs at night for any reason. It was morning now, the sun barely peeking over the treetop. Not much had changed, except for what I called the Great Spider Migration. I hadn't seen but a few on the porch in weeks. I wasn't too torn up about it after the little assholes had declared war and broke our truce. It was as I was putting out the second cigarette of the morning when I happened to glance up at the railing across from mine. Two little mantis nymphs perched on the top of the railing watched me, heads tilted and maxillary palps twitching in curiosity. They were bright green and tan, their little developing wings tipped in a bright white. I smiled. Hello, little ones. I've worked at this place for as long as I remember, and it's pretty weird and even harder to describe. It's your usual family fun indoor park, I guess. There's a million of them all over the place, and they all have different names. We have a crappy little cafe that overcharges for stale hot dogs, and then a buttload of warehouse space filled with random crap to keep kids entertained. There's a jungle gym, an arcade with ancient games, a greasy bowling alley, and obviously, there's a ball pit. Honestly, it's a pretty cool job, although it has taught me that kids, in general, are super weird. I remember this one time a random kid came up to me and handed me some marbles, and then just started laughing. It took me a few minutes to get it out of him, but he told me that he shoved the marbles up his butt, and now I was touching his butt marbles. And he just thought it was the funniest goddamn thing anyone has ever done. Ever. We have a high turnover rate, that's for sure. We chew through new employees like popcorn, and I think it's because kids have this weird ability to home in on anyone they make uncomfortable and just thrive off the awkwardness. At least teachers and parents get to deal with only one set of kids, right? They get to know them over time, and sure, those kids will occasionally explode or have prolonged periods of crazy high energy, but for the most part, the parents and teachers are there to manage the kids. But that's the exact opposite of what we do. We're here to manage the center, not the kids. Every kid here is meant to blow off steam. That's why parents bring them here. It's why they pay the entry fee. And we can't make these kids sit down or write lines. We can't threaten to goad or shout. What we have is a revolving door of kids who are permanently psyched out, and we're just meant to keep them occupied long enough for their parents to smoke a joint around the back or cry in the toilets when no one can see them break down. I gotta say, it's tough. I only stuck it out because I'm in management, and that means my job is to get a bunch of teenagers to do all the dirty work. It's like a pyramid scheme, but grosser. Nobody at Enron had to brush vomit out of a crying 9-year-old's hair. Still, I limit my exposure to the kids, and for a damn good reason. They scare the hell out of me. For one thing, there's always the wrong number. This place is always full, no matter how many tickets we sell. Most people don't even stay here long enough to notice. But I have. I've spent a few years now counting tickets and then heads, and I know for a fact that there are rainy days in the middle of the coldest winters when we sell 10, maybe 20 tickets at most. But no matter what, the floor is crawling with kids. Another thing, kids go to the ball pit and don't come out. Nobody complains, nobody's reported missing. But I know for a fact that not only do some kids never come back out, but some kids that do come out never went in the first place. I already know what you're thinking, that I'm nuts. But I once trialed a photo day just to confirm my suspicions. I took pics of the kids and parents coming and going. I said it was for a competition. And I swear to God, I have dozens of photos of parents coming in with one kid and leaving with a totally different one. I've thought about trying to empty the ball pit out to see if there's anywhere they could go, like a tunnel I never knew about. I did try to empty it once. It was years ago, and I wanted to clean it properly, so I waited until after hours and started scooping balls out and dumping them into empty bins. But after a while, I got scared and stopped. Something about the experience just freaked me out. It was like the more balls I pulled out, the quieter everything got. Like the whole place started to anticipate something. All those weird cartoon characters painted onto the walls with freaky eyes that follow you around the room. The zombie shooter arcade machines that make those stupid, fake ghoul noises. The twisty airplane rocket that rocks back and forth and blasting obnoxious music. It all kind of faded out. It was like the whole place held its breath, and my head started to throb like the world's worst hangover, and my mouth started tasting all coppery, and it made me want to retch. It freaked me out, and I stopped and just tipped the balls back in. As soon as I did, the pressure in my head released, and the place was full of noise again, like nothing had even changed. Now, I just clean the ball pit out with one of those nets they use for swimming pools. There's always the weirdest stuff in there. Dead mice, crushed insects, dog poo, random goo, and what I can only describe as a series of gifts or messed up experiments. I don't know where they come from, but a week hasn't gone past where I haven't had to fish some half-dead, tortured animal out of the depths of that pit. If I'm lucky, the animal dies as soon as I pull it out, but I keep a spare pillowcase around here just in case. I don't know how humane it is to be stuffed into a sack and smashed against an alley wall, but I know it has to be more humane than keeping them alive. I used to think the kids dragged roadkill in there, but after I started paying a little more attention, I noticed things like badly sutured wounds stitched together with random threads, or even half-healed amputations. I don't think it's even possible for a kid to pull off such a successful trepanning on a squirrel and keep the thing alive, half paralyzed at the bottom of a ball pit. It just doesn't make sense. But I keep finding them, half stuffed with bugs, eyelids cut off. Jesus Christ, the worst one didn't even have any cuts. I still don't know who did it or how. I don't know how the ball got inside the rat. It was alive, with no scars or open wounds, but it was like it had swallowed the whole damn ball. It wasn't crying or making any noise. It was just shivering, alive and in shock at what had happened to it. The pain must have been overwhelming. All of its organs crushed, its bones pushed out of sockets. Just looking at it made me want to hurl. It was the most unnatural thing I've ever seen. It's just another reason why I couldn't ask anyone else to do this job. I think most people come and go so quickly, they never realize just how weird it is. I'd rather no one start asking questions. I think if I was braver, I'd try to dig a little deeper, and I'd encourage others to help me. But no one else has seen the weirdness up close like I have, and I guess my conclusion is this. If we don't know what's down there, why bother it? It's clearly best to just leave it alone. That's why I'm glad we have a high turnover rate. People get super weird if they stick around too long. I've moved a few people on because they started to go a bit loopy. First, we see paranoia setting in. They start looking at you funny. Or the kids. I mean, the kids I get. But me? What's wrong with me? Second, we see them starting to fixate on the ball pit. People who stay too long obsess over it. When you're not looking, they'll sneak over and try to jam a broomstick into the bottom. When they can't find it, they'll start freaking out, talking about foundations and floor plans. Finally, the worst ones will start trying to go over my head and speak to corporate. They go nuts, asking questions and ringing numbers and just bugging me over and over. If you're not careful, they can actually become quite threatening. I know you wouldn't think it, but people get really wound up about this kind of stuff. One girl I had to call the cops on. She developed a real unhealthy interest in me. She even asked me where I lived, She wanted to know where I slept and ate and who my parents were. Even after I fired her, she kept coming back, even tried to burn the place down. I think this place messes with people's minds because she started talking about how the number to HQ just went to my office. My driver's license was fake, my clothes had someone else's name sewed onto them. Where did I even go at night? Where did I sleep? Where was my car? She even revealed that one night she'd camped outside the building and waited for me like some goddamn stalker. When I confronted her about it, she had no defense. She was completely gone over the edge, talking about how the old manager went missing years ago and I was wearing his uniform and no one had ever seen me outside the center. I'm glad she's gone now, because she made me really uncomfortable with that paranoid rambling. I still don't know what she was implying. Honestly, just listening to her gave me a really bad headache with a coppery taste. I still wonder what happened to her. But she's a good example of why we should just leave this thing alone, because, sure enough, the next week, I found myself fishing one of her shoes out of the ball pit. I think what was weirdest about that was that it wasn't covered in blood or anything like that. It just had a small note asking me, personally, for help. She was so troubled. I tried to tell her to stop, tried to give her some clue. When I'd fired her, just before the stalking started, she started asking me all these questions about how long I'd been working here and whether I'd seen the bottom of the ball pit. And I kept trying to tell her, I've been here for as long as I can remember, and I'm pretty sure the ball pit is bottomless. Well, now she can be sure about it too. Every seat has been filled. The aisles are empty. We've boarded and taken off, all while a nervous-looking man stands mysteriously at the back of the plane. No one seems to notice him. I do. He was already on when I sat down, in my row at the end of the aisle. Dressed casually, he carried himself with a sullen anxiety that I found unsettling. I hate flying, always have, but still, this felt different. I gave him a once-over. He looked normal enough. I found no reason to be worried, yet his presence perturbed me. I shrugged it off. There wasn't much that I could do. I tried to relax. My mind wandered, and I found myself casually daydreaming about his identity. I imagined that he was a middling cop, nervous about transporting a dangerous criminal. Then he became a repentant lover who had broken through security to proclaim his desires to an ex. Maybe he was a disgruntled former employee waiting to take his vengeance. As the plane filled up and the man took no further action though, my interest waned. I was tired with worry and already sick of the long flight ahead. His presence drained from my mind, and I rested my head against the curved innards of the aircraft and daydreamed instead about nothing at all. At the sound of takeoff, however, my posture straightened and his bloated shape tilted back into the corner of my eye. I felt compelled to look over. There he was, still, with a manner slightly less sullen but precisely more anxious, standing opposite the bathroom door, staring down the aisle. No crew member came to seat him. I double-checked the seatbelt sign. On. I glanced over at my two rowmates. They didn't seem to notice. Weird. I coyly nudged the armrest of my neighbour, an elderly woman who had been reading the in-flight brochure. She kindly looked up and over at me. I gave a friendly smile and silently gestured towards the man standing behind us. She smiled back, oblivious, and elbowed the old man sitting next to her, who leaned forward slightly and donated a half-hearted head nod. Suddenly, the plane lurched forward, and we were thrust back into our seats. I straightened up, slightly unnerved. I could see the man in the corner of my eye. He didn't move. I raised the blinder on the window next to me. The world outside sped up to a blur. I sat upright and popped my head over the seats, looking for a crew member. I saw a stewardess near the middle of the plane, sitting comfortably by the emergency exit door, facing us. She didn't seem to notice the standing man. I glanced out of the window. The runway began to shrink away below us. Still, the man stood. When the seatbelt sign blinked off, I quickly unfastened. I excused myself to the elderly couple and stepped out into the aisle. I was curious. Should I say something? To the man? To the crew? To another passenger? Perhaps he was an air marshal. But weren't they supposed to blend in? The man wore plain clothes, but stood out as everyone sat. Not exactly conspicuous. Maybe he was some kind of inspector for the airline. Maybe for the government? Are you waiting for the bathroom? I asked. He was about my height, though he was slouched slightly against the wall. He had been staring down the aisle, off into the distance, but abruptly glanced my way when questioned. I held my breath in anticipation, only to receive a dismissive headshake. He turned back around and resettled into his distant stare. That was disappointing, I thought. Maybe the daydreams had heightened my expectations. I opened the bathroom door and slunk inside. I was feeling woozy. I splashed some water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look great, but that wasn't unusual. I shook my head and walked back out. The man was still standing there, staring down the aisle. A small 3-person procession had formed in the space just outside of the bathroom. I slipped out as an elderly woman slipped in. The 2 older men behind her shambled forward. One met my eyes and gave a polite smile, which I returned. The other had his head down. Neither seemed to acknowledge the standing man. I wondered if they had questioned him as well. I excused myself to the elderly couple in my row and shuffled back down into my window seat. The man still stood just behind us, transfixed by some distant point. No sense of threat seemed to emanate from him though, and I was exhausted, so I slunk down in my chair, closed my eyes, and dozed off. I dreamt of a beautiful summer day in a quiet little town. I walked along the street, alone but content. Fine 2-story brick homes with shingled roofs washed up and down my left side like angular waves, and a long, endless park slithered brightly along my right. There were no cars on the road, parked or moving, but every other house had a vehicle or 2 stationed in the driveway. The park was empty too, though there were a half-dozen or so red and white balloons tied to the bench, which sat just off the sidewalk opposite to me, beside a big oak tree. As I walked, the sun glared above, and I noticed a pair of shoes sticking out from behind the oak tree. They were black with brown tips, and they were pointed directly up towards the sky. As I walked forward, I saw these shoes were connected to a pair of clean grey dress pants, and as I walked further still, I saw that a torso, draped in a pale blue button-up shirt, jutted out from the top of these pants. A rotund gut concealed any further viewing, but it heaved and hoed so as to suggest that a head may rest on either side. Curious, I crossed the street and made my way towards the body. As I approached, the belly began to breathe in heavier exaggerations until I stood directly over a throbbing mass of clothing. I looked down for a face, but no head appeared. Instead, a framed mirror weighed down by a collar of an empty button-up shirt, which now expanded and deflated so intensely that I thought it might explode. I looked into the mirror and saw my own reflection, and then someone else's. I jumped and spun around. No one was there. I looked up. No one. I looked back down. A root from the big oak tree had curled around the mirror's frame and slithered its way into the shirt. The two pulsed in rhythm with each other. A strong breeze blew. The big oak tree creaked loudly and swayed in the wind until it looked like it might fall over. Panicked, I gripped the root woven into the shirt and pulled at it with all my might. I gently awoke. My left elbow tingled and my hand was numb. I rose up in my seat and gave my arm a shake. I looked around. A food cart sauntered forward a few rows up. The elderly lady next to me was reading. Her husband appeared to be asleep. I had to go to the bathroom. I excused myself to my neighbour and carefully pirouetted past her sleeping companion. Still groggy, I shook my head, wiped my brow and looked up, right into the eyes of the standing man. I froze. His eyes were huge, like that of a child, but his face was worn and weathered, and thin strands of pale brown hair fell upon his forehead. He stared right through my soul, more sorrowful than ever, but less anxious than before. He didn't speak. I couldn't speak. I stumbled backwards a little bit, but caught myself on the edge of a seat. I felt shell-shocked. I tried to gather myself, but as I stood up, a cold, heavy force blasted into my backside, hurling me forward. I was barely able to contort my body enough to avoid the man standing in front of me. My back rammed against the bathroom door, and I froze like a prisoner caught in a spotlight. "Oh my God," I heard from the aisle. "I'm so sorry." I turned. The food cart, manned by a distressed-looking stewardess, rattled in the walkway. "I didn't see you. I'm so sorry. I only looked down for a second," she pleaded. "It's all right," I stammered, as I straightened up and tried to compose myself. "I wasn't paying attention. It's my fault." The stewardess furrowed her brow and squinted her eyes. Are you all right?" she asked. "Everything but my pride," I responded dryly. I was shaken up inside, but I didn't want to make a fuss. I composed my outward appearance. I turned to the standing man, contemplating whether or not I should even bother apologizing for the ruckus. He seemed indifferent to the whole situation. He looked ill. Did the stewardess notice? Why didn't she, or anyone else, try to seat him during takeoff? He must have some sort of authority, but he appeared so fragile and sickly. I looked back at the flight attendant to gauge her interest. She didn't seem alarmed. "Excuse me," she said politely, as she began to slowly push the cart forward again. "I need to get by." I gave my head a shake. I opened the bathroom door and slunk away inside. I felt panicked. If the man was sick, he should get help. Someone must have already approached him, though. It's not like he was hiding. The stewardess didn't seem concerned at all. everything must be under control. Still, I couldn't shake this feeling of impending doom. I wasn't sure what to do. I looked in the mirror to calm myself, but didn't like what I saw. I turned towards the inside of the bathroom door and laid my forehead against it. I put my face in my hands and tried to gather myself. What was I getting so worked up over? Was I getting sick? Was I going crazy? Maybe I'm just hungry. When did I last eat? I strained to remember. The only memory of food that I could resuscitate on the spot was a meal that had taken place at least a few nights earlier. My eyes began to well up as I thought about that dinner. Maybe I was becoming feverish. I rubbed my cheeks. My wife and I had made a roast beef and Yorkshire pudding that night. It was an old family recipe. My parents used to make it for my brothers and I growing up. We made it for our own kids now. My parents had passed away a few years ago. God, I miss them. I couldn't wait for this godforsaken plane ride to be over so that I could see my family again. I was getting flustered. I just needed to eat, I told myself. That special dinner was plentiful, but even something as tender and delicious as a good roast beef can't last a man a lifetime. I resolved to hunt down the food cart that had assaulted me earlier and plunder it with a vengeance. I tossed some water on my face, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the bathroom. I don't know what I was expecting, but there he was, the mystery man just standing there. I need to ask about him too, I thought, for my own sake. He was in the same place he had been this whole time, staring off into the distance. I eyed him cautiously as I searched for the stewardess in the back. She wasn't there. I turned and gazed off into the distance and saw her chatting with a fellow crew member closer to the front of the plane. I took off after them. I passed through a mostly silent field of passengers. Nearly everyone was lost in their own little world. People were sleeping, reading, watching in-flight entertainment. Very few were talking. There was a hushed air about the cabin. Most seemed to be travelling alone. I noticed that a majority of the plane's population were elderly. 3 or 4 middle-aged individuals stood out, as did a few unaccompanied youths. A cloth-wrapped infant was being rocked to sleep by a young woman in an aisle seat, and 3 young men, outfitted in army attire, quietly joked around near the emergency exits. The rest of the plane, however, was decidedly more aged and reserved. Was I headed to Florida? I genuinely couldn't remember. "Can I help you?" The 2 flight attendants suddenly stood before me. Yeah, sorry," I stammered, jolted out of my inquisitive reverie. "Is it too late to order some food?" I asked, feeling a little faint. "It is, unfortunately," answered the stewardess. "We're about to make our descent." I was surprised. For some reason, I had expected a lengthier flight. Maybe I'd slept for longer than I realized. "You should return to your seat," she smiled. "The seatbelt sign will be turning on momentarily." "Okay," I yielded. I turned around and looked down the aisle. The standing man stared back. Actually, can I ask you a question?" I said, turning back around. "Yes, sir," responded the stewardess politely. I wasn't exactly sure what to say, or how to put it. I gathered myself once again. Well, do you see that man standing outside the bathroom?" I asked, pointing back up the aisle towards him. I immediately regretted my approach. What if I was actually going crazy? What if I had a fever and was hallucinating? I didn't want to scare anyone. If I was pointing towards a piece of empty space and proclaiming an invisible man was harassing me, then this flight was going to get really tense for everyone really fast. You can never rest when a maniac is in your midst. "Yes," replied the stewardess. "Oh," I blurted out. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or more worried. I'd seriously considered that she might not be able to see him. "Well, he's been standing outside the bathroom since takeoff. I don't know if he's ill or if he's a special part of the crew or something. I don't know, but he hasn't sat down once since I boarded. He doesn't look well either. He looks worried and sickly and hasn't been responsive. Is he part of the crew?" "No," replied the stewardess. "Oh, well, I mean, shouldn't we help him to his seat then? If we're about to land, he should be seated, right?" I was sweating a little by now, and more worried than before. None of this really made any sense. "And where do you suggest we seat him, sir?" replied the stewardess firmly. "What?" I asked, genuinely shocked by the flippancy of her response. I turned around and looked for an empty seat. Surely there was one. How else would he have gotten on the plane? If he wasn't part of the crew, he needed a ticket. A ticket would have a seat. I frantically looked around. Every seat was filled, except for mine. I began to sweat profusely. I felt fevered and exhausted. A tinge of adrenaline rushed through my body. I looked up and out again at the mystery man. He stared back. I turned to the flight attendant. "What do you mean? He doesn't have a seat? Did you check his ticket? How did he get on board? What's he going to do while we land?" I was becoming frantic. "You could give him your seat," suggested the stewardess matter-of-factly. "But," I mumbled, "then where would I sit?" She didn't respond. I looked helplessly at the other flight attendant, a steward. He said nothing. I felt like I was going to be sick to my stomach. I needed to sit down. I wondered who looked worse right now, me or the standing man. Should I give him my seat? I looked up at him. Even from far away, I could see that he looked gravely ill. No one was helping him. No one was helping either of us. "I need to sit," I uttered. I felt like I was about to lose consciousness. "It's you or him," I heard. "Why?" I whispered. "There's only one seat left," someone said, "and he's here for yours." My stomach dropped the full 7 miles below my feet. My vision blurred and my body felt faint. I turned around, back towards the mysterious man. What the hell was going on? I tried to shout, but nothing came out. I grabbed the edges of the surrounding seats and pulled myself towards him. I needed to get back to my seat. I picked up steam and drew near, but still, he did not move. "Don't take my seat," I sputtered out. No one paid us any attention. I reached the last row, almost on my knees. I gripped the top of a seat and pulled myself up. I stood for a second, facing down my row, towards my empty seat, and then fainted sideways, directly onto the standing man. I felt no contact until I hit the ground. My eyes were closed, but I felt the cold, hard fabric of the airplane carpet rub against my cheek. I laid there, exhausted. Terrified, I mustered what strength I could and clumsily pushed myself up onto my knees. I kneeled for a second, turned away from the action, and tried to catch my breath. I felt as heavy as a mountain. Slowly, I pushed my way back onto my feet, leaning against the cold plastic wall for support. I turned around, labored and out of breath, and looked forward. The man was gone. I became frozen in fear. In the corner of my eye, I could see someone in my chair, with thin strands of pale brown hair strewn over huge eyes, staring at me. In the distance of the aisle, lights began to shut off, leaving only pure and eternal darkness in their wake. One by one, they clicked off as the darkness raced towards me, until a final click enveloped everything in black. I woke up on my back with a bright light shining on my face. "Doctor?" I heard a soft, distant voice ask. "He's waking up." I tried to raise my left hand to shade my eye, but it was weighed down by a thick tube which slid from the side of my bed to a mask on my mouth. I took a deep breath and felt an incredible soreness in my chest. I coughed. It hurt so much that I instinctively tried to retreat over the side of the bed. A firm hand grasped my shoulder and kept me in place. "Easy now," said a reassuring voice. "You're going to be all right." I heard a door open. Someone gasped. "Daddy?" A voice half whispered, half yelled. A child rushed over to the side of my bed, followed cautiously by a woman holding an infant. They all looked familiar. It was my family. "He might not have the strength to speak right now, but the operation was successful," explained the reassuring voice. "He's got a new pair of lungs and a heart, all from the same donor. They were made available late last night and rushed over just in time for an emergency surgery." Someone began to cry. They sounded grateful. I felt the warm weight of a child rest gently on my shoulder, and a loving hand grasp mine. I held both with all my strength and dozed off contently. At Christmas, we had a recreation of what we had once thought was going to be my last meal: roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Everyone was invited. Extended family from all over the country poured into our home to celebrate. Longtime friends stopped by early in the evening, on the way to family dinners of their own, to offer their congratulations and express their joy and relief at my recovery. Near the end of the night, after all the memories and laughter had been given their time and our bellies were full and people started to slowly drain out, I took my brothers and young son upstairs to my home office for our traditional Christmas time glass of bourbon. I poured each a cup as I looked fondly over framed pictures that cluttered the room. "Is that him?" I heard. I looked up and directed my attention to a photo that was suspended just off to the right and just above a large family portrait that hung as a centerpiece on the wall across from my desk. "Yep, that's our savior," I said, looking down at my baby boy asleep in my arms. I kissed his forehead and smiled gratefully. "Well, salute," declared my brother. "Salute," we all chanted, raising our glasses. And then we had a drink for the man in the picture on my wall, a man who none of us had ever met. He smiled gently from a boat somewhere out at sea, with his brown hair windswept to the side and a child, half in frame, sitting precariously on his lap. His face was filled with excitement and amusement as he held up a significant-looking fish by the hook with his left hand. You could see the reflection of his wife taking the picture in his eyes. They were so big. The final walkthrough had been going great until it was said. We were standing by the barn away from the realtors, my husband and I, along with the couple we were purchasing the property from, Ralph and Marie. I know how it sounds. You'll think I have a screw loose until you meet him yourself. The old man smiled awkwardly. Just don't speak to the wandering man. It sounds alarming, but he never gave us any trouble. Ralph looked at his wife, and she nodded quickly. Never any trouble, and we've been seeing him less and less, Marie said. When was the last time we even saw him, honey? Oh, Ralph pawed his beard. I'd say 3.5 years ago, and it had been another 2 before that. I was a little disturbed, but could tell my husband, Howard, was getting annoyed. What are you talking about? Some kind of trespasser? He said, frowning. Look, we're giving you a good deal on this place because it wouldn't feel right making a fortune selling it with these circumstances. You're safe here, and that's what matters. But there's a man that wanders these woods. Ralph stared at us gravely, and he has for some 100 years. Howard sighed obnoxiously and stared at the husband and wife, each in turn with disappointment. Anything else we should know? Ghosts in the attic, blood leaking from the walls? The couple looked at each other, embarrassed. I know it's hard to believe when we're talking like this, but we're normal folks. We're just giving you a heads up. I'll tell you what, forget this conversation until you see him. I'm a little sorry I said anything. I just wanted to save you from a fright. Will do. Howard looked up at me and didn't care to hide his growing disdain. The thing was, I liked Ralph. When we drove all the way from Boston to remote Maine to tour the property, Ralph actually looked at me where he felled his trees for firewood and explained how the hydraulic log splitter worked. Most men who owned the properties only spoke to my husband when it came to anything related to farm work. I was the ghost. Howard and I had finally reached the end of a brutal buying process to purchase our homestead in northern New England, and I could see why Howard was angry. There were no such things as ghosts to him. Now, our brand new home had some trespasser he'd be worried about. Come on, Jody, said Howard. He was already walking back to the house. I watched him over my shoulder, but stayed still. I suppose I was more prone to believe in the supernatural. Ralph took off his bald cap and rubbed his bald spot. I'm sorry, we didn't really know how to tell you this. We even thought about rehearsing. He laughed uncomfortably. But I'm deadly serious. He sighed, as if sick of coming across as a madman. When you see him, don't speak to him. You can say hello, he won't respond to that. But if you say anything else... Ralph stared fearfully into the distance as if looking upon the past. Well, don't. Just ignore him and be sure to tell him too. Ralph pointed past me to my husband's back. I nodded. Their sincerity made me want to believe them. They seemed like regular people who understood they were coming across as crazy and were ashamed of it. Thank you two, really. I shook their hands and they both smiled, relieved to be treated normally. I almost thought we were never going to find a place. Well, I don't think we could have found a lovelier couple to sell it to. Across the lawn from the barn, we could see the lake. It was autumn then, and the three of us were quiet as we watched the breeze send a brigade of birch leaves spinning into the cold water. Ralph closed his eyes and took a deep breath. And welcome, he extended his arms. Welcome to heaven on earth. We settled in fast. While I had a marketing job that was fully remote, Howard's job was hybrid. Every week or so, he would have to commute to Bangor to catch a connecting flight at Boston Logan, where he'd be ferried to some project around the country. He worked in engineering consultancy, and while I liked my job, he loved his. He said he didn't mind the extra commute, and I didn't mind being left alone in a house where the nearest neighbor was a mile away. Getting fast enough internet to work from the woods was the biggest hurdle, but after shelling out $200 a month for satellite, we seemed set. I suppose we weren't your average couple who moved from the city to the middle of nowhere, but it made sense. we loved nature and self-sufficiency and didn't utilize the amenities of the city. Neither of us had friends that we saw often anymore, and when it came to family, the further away they were, the better. Maybe there were signs I hadn't seen before, but it was a month after we moved in that I first noticed something was off. It was late, 11 p.m. or so, and I sat alone by a bonfire on the lake shore. Howard, already asleep inside, being the early to bed, early to rise type. I brought my wine to my lips and paused mid-sip. There, a half-mile away on the far side of the lake, a figure was strolling the shore. It was dark, but by the starlight, I was sure it was a person. I leaned forward and frowned. There were 2 other homes in the lake, but the shoreline was largely undeveloped and the woods that lined the lake were impenetrable with thick pine and aspen. Was this him, the harmless, wandering man? I changed my sip to a swig and considered. Ralph had said he'd last seen him years ago, and I thought it was strange he should make an appearance so soon. Then again, maybe this man only wandered at night, and Ralph and Marie rolled. It was likely they couldn't see very far in the dark, and how often did they sit outside at this hour? I had been having bonfires nearly nightly. It was one of the biggest reasons I'd moved out to the rural woods. You see, when I was camping as a girl, I developed a kind of addiction. An addiction to that sensation brought by the stars and the silence of the lonely vacuum of visible space. Maybe you felt it too, sitting alone at night, far from civilization, underneath stars as thick as smoke. We're faced with a nauseating sense of our insignificance. It's at night, with the universe in sight and for scale, that we can see we're barely bigger than bacteria, with lives just as brief and legacies just as remembered. I couldn't get enough of it, of the oneness, of the vulnerability that comes under the vault. Only stepping inside would break the trance. Then, when I woke the next morning, I'd wondered how I'd ever felt so small, smiling in the sunshine, assured and confident in the enormity of myself. But I had a different sensation that night. The feeling of an animal being watched. The feeling of prey. Something was wrong with how he walked, but it took me a minute to realize what it was. His steps never paused or wavered. The lake shore was not a smooth apron of rock. It was strewn with big branches of driftwood and boulders of basalt. If you were to walk it, you'd go slow as you considered your every step. I shivered then. In another few minutes, he was difficult to see, and then he turned into the woodline and disappeared into the pines entirely. "You're safe here," I remember Ralph saying. "Just don't speak to him." I was not afraid of the dark, and I wasn't going to let myself be spooked away from doing what I loved on my own property. I kept having bonfires at night, while I was determined to not let this man ruin my rural evenings. I admit, I rarely took my eyes from the opposite shore. It was a few weeks later, and beginning to get cold enough to snow, when I thoroughly began to question the safety of the woods where we lived. I'd finished splitting a quarter cord by hand. I was bent, breathing while palming my knees, when I noticed it. We had an ancient birch tree just past the woodshed, and its removal was on the to-do list as it sat dying with its bark peeling off in scrolls. But sticking out just beneath a bit of bark, something caught my eye. I squinted and walked over. With a finger, I pushed the bark back. There was a carving. I frowned. A carving. Of me. Of my face. It was a crude carving, as if done with a fingernail, but I still smiled when I saw it. My birthday was coming up, and I figured Howard had to be behind it. He was good at drawing, but I'd never heard of him carving before. The alarm bells weren't ringing then. I went inside to find him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders as he sat at his computer. "I'm very sorry, I found you surprised," I said, "but you're very sweet." I kissed his cheek, and he smiled. "What are you talking about? I found you carving out there while chopping wood." He frowned, and I didn't need to hear what he said next to know. "I never carved anything. Where?" My blood ran cold. I took my arms away from his shoulders. "On the dead birch tree." He started to stand. "What's it a carving of?" The two of us stood in the cold and stared at the tree. "This is a joke, right?" He pointed and looked at me and laughed. "Did you do this?" "No, Howard, I didn't carve it. I mean, it's not very flattering, no offense. Why is this something to joke about to you?" He said, and clicked his tongue. "You think this must be the Wandering Man, the one in the woods that kooky old couple warned us about?" "Howard, no, it's okay. I'll handle it. I think I'll give Ralph a call." He started walking away. "Howard!" "What?" "I know you're not going to take me seriously, but I've seen someone on the lake shore late at night." "You're right, I'm not going to take you seriously. So why tell me that in the first place?" "I know what those people said sounded strange, but my gut didn't tell me they were lying." "Guess what? I don't think they were lying either, but they believed crap like that and then tried to scare us the second we finally found a home. They're rude people, Jody, or at least not right in the head. And now this?" He pointed at the tree. "What, did they pull a picture of you off the internet and carve this here?" "I don't think so." "Well, who did then?" Things weren't the same after that, both between me and Howard and how I felt on the property. Howard is a sweet man, but I could tell my belief in the supernatural bothered him. Deep down, it probably scared him. He was rarely impatient and condescending to me, and I was frustrated too. We couldn't afford to just try and sell this place and leave. This was our home, and I didn't want to be afraid of here either. That same Sunday, I was watching television late after Howard had gone to bed. It was a perfect night for another fire, clear and cool. But for the first time since we'd moved, I couldn't bring myself to sit outside alone. In fact, I'd locked the doors for the first time, and while Howard had noticed, I could tell he was relieved I'd done so and said nothing. I was developing the beginnings of paranoid habits. Every hour or so, I would look out the windows, not just the front ones either. I'd go into the kitchen, the den, the pantry, just to stare into the night. On my last round of looking out the windows that night, I turned from the diamond panes of the front door to head up to bed, but paused. I had seen something. I turned back slowly. Just beyond the black where the security light on our garage faded, a man was standing at the edge of the dark. I gasped. My first instinct was to open the door and yell, but then I remembered Ralph's warning. I threw myself up the stairs and went into our bedroom and shook Howard's foot to wake him. "Howard? I think there's someone outside. Please just come see." He sighed and rolled so his feet were on the floor. "Okay, for you." I stood on the stairs while he leaned to look out the window glass in the door. "I don't see anything." He turned back to me. "Just at the edge of the light." I stepped past him and put my eye to the glass. But there was nothing there. My shoulders sank. "He was right there," I said quietly, defeated. "Jody, I'm sorry I was snappy before, but this is what I'm so frustrated about. Those people put a creepy idea in your head, and now you're seeing what you want to see. I saw someone. I'll order a Ring doorbell tomorrow. You can put up a whole set of security cameras if you want. This is our home. We need to feel safe here. I'll do whatever it takes for you to feel that way." He tried to lay a hand on my shoulder, but I flinched away and stayed staring at the window while he went back upstairs to bed. I did order security cameras, enough for a cartel compound. Camera on the barn, camera on the garage, infrared camera to point across the lake. I was going to feel safe here. Howard was right about that. It was our home. I had to. It cost an entire paycheck, but was worth a peace of mind. However, it brought the opposite. I set up multiple monitors, moved in the coffee maker, and turned my little office into a war room. The first few nights, there was nothing. Then, the fourth night, at 2 a.m, I saw something walking the perimeter of the property. I perked up, splashing my coffee in its cup. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." I was more elated than scared. I finally had this thing. Or so I thought. When I played back the footage, I cursed. The figure was just out of range of the cameras. I should have shelled out more and bought only infrared. The lights in the garage and barn weren't going to be bright enough. I still didn't share anything with Howard. While I could make out what I thought was a face and shoulder of this man walking, I knew it wouldn't be enough to convince him. Howard didn't want to believe. The footage would have to be perfect. When I first got the cameras, I forsook sleep and let my marketing work slip. I had to capture an image of this thing. I'd nearly become nocturnal, and my sleep deprivation began to scare me just as much as whatever was in those woods. I left the oven on and open, forgot my husband was home, ran the coffee maker without the pot in it. I was a mess, and I had to hit the brakes. Instead of staying up and watching live, I decided I'd fast forward the footage when I had time the next day. That night, I planned to resume my regular sleep schedule. It was around 11 p.m. when I went upstairs, and I jumped when I opened the bedroom door. Howard was mummied in the sheets. The entire long length of him was draped skin tight from head to toe. I raced over to him, but heard his steady breathing and relaxed. I thought that thing had killed him. I was losing it, I realized. I was really losing it. I took 2 Benadryl and slipped into bed. Miraculously, I slept and later woke in a fright to the bedroom door closing. But it was 4 a.m. and I realized Howard was already up to go for a run. I tossed and turned, but couldn't fall back to sleep. The cameras called to me like a siren song. I threw the sheets off me and went downstairs. The house was empty. Howard's running sneakers weren't on the shoe shelf, and I knew I'd have ample time to check the footage without looking like a lunatic. I sat in my chair, but before I could rewind the footage, I froze. On the live screen, the man was staring at the front of the house as still as a street performer and more in view than he'd ever been. His clothes were thick and woolen, but his face was hidden from view. "Damn," I said aloud, suddenly realizing he was outside with this thing. "Howard!" Luckily, he brought his phone to listen to music when he ran, and I dialed him immediately. He answered on one of the latter rings. "Jody, what's going on?" "Howard," I exhaled. "Thank Christ. That man is staring at the house right now." "What? Are you safe?" "Jody, it's 4 a.m. There's no one outside. Go back to bed." "I'm telling you, I have him on camera this time. Come back. Or no, wait until it's light out. Don't come back until it's daylight." He paused. "I think you need to go stay with your parents." "I'm safe. I'm inside. Just get back here safely when you can." "Jody." His voice was cautious now, as if I was something fragile that could be broken. "I'm out of town on a project outside of Dallas right now. Remember? Until Friday?" I froze in terror as I stared at that thing on the screen. Then who is in our bed tonight? What? I let the phone fall to my lap. Howard was yelling loud enough for me to still hear, yelling about getting out of the house. But I couldn't speak anymore. It hadn't been Howard. It was the shape of that thing that I'd seen under the sheets before bed. I pictured it staring at me as I slept. I hung up and walked in a trance to the door. It was unlocked. I had sworn I locked it. I clenched my teeth in anger and threw it open. I stared at the man, and instead of just looking at the house, he was now staring back at me. "What do you want with me?" I shrieked horribly. "Leave me alone, you creep. You hear me? Leave me alone." His head began to tilt to one shoulder, tilting too far. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh God." I'd spoken to this thing. I'd broken the only rule. I slammed the door and leaned my back against it. Suddenly, there was a horrible howling that morphed into sobs, the sobs of a grown man crying in the night. But there was something wrong with the noise. It was as if he were only mimicking emotion, like he didn't know what cries were supposed to sound like. Ralph had given me his number, and I fumbled my phone trying to find his contact. As it rang, I managed to turn towards the sound. The crying continued, but that thing was walking calmly towards the house. Its features were wrong. Its legs too long, its hands too big. Suddenly, I saw its eyes the size of tea saucers. It smiled monstrously wide, but the sobs continued. "Hello?" came a confused voice on the other line. "Ralph, it's Jody. Jody, Cope, I bought your property. It's a bit early, Jody. That thing, the man walking in the woods, he drew a picture of me. He came into my house. He's been watching me, and now I talk to him." "Oh dear," I heard him stretch. "Okay, are your doors locked?" "Uh-huh. You said it drew a picture. It carved my face into a tree." "Okay," he sighed. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. It ignored me and Marie." "But when you spoke to it, what happened? What's it want?" "When I asked who it was, it showed me what it really looked like, and I suppose a man isn't quite the word for it." "But what does it want?" I screamed and braved another look out the window. It was even closer now, just a few feet from the door. I ran into the living room. "I don't know," said Ralph. "I really don't. I'm sorry to say this, but..." He paused, and my heart leapt as 3 soft knocks sounded on the door. "It sounds like he likes you." When I was 10 years old, I heard a man die and did nothing to help. It's not something I'm proud of, but I was just a scared kid at the time. I was often left home alone when I was a child. I won't say my parents didn't love me or anything so dramatic, but they had priorities. Oftentimes, I was not high on that list. Still, I enjoyed the solitude. I had the run of the house and could pretty much get away with whatever I wanted while they were gone. Well, as long as I made sure to clean up after myself. It was early February when it happened, while my folks were out on a part Valentine's, part anniversary date. They had married at this time of year around 15 years ago, so they would make a big deal about it annually. It was snowy outside, and I wanted to go play in it while they were gone. But I had the biggest fear about inadvertently getting myself locked out of the house and freezing to death before anyone arrived to save me. It was close to 10 o'clock when my mum called and told me they would not be home until morning. This would neither be my first nor last time alone in the house, so I assured her I would keep the doors locked and get to bed at a reasonable hour. Surely, what I considered reasonable and what she did were far different times. Were I being responsible, I would likely already be in bed, but I was happily in the middle of binging horror movies when she called. I won't say they never gave me nightmares, as my mother warned, but I still loved them. We had a great assortment of channels on our unlocked cable box, so it wasn't hard to track down movies to suit my late-night tastes. It was growing closer to midnight, and I felt my body begin to crave my bed when the commotion began outside. I peeked through the living room window to see a man screaming and running across the street. He was yelling out for anyone to help him. He even ran into some of the neighboring houses and pounded on their doors. "Help, for God's sake, somebody help me," he cried out into the night while he slammed his fists against the doors and walls. Most houses just turned the lights off when all of this began, but I couldn't look away. What could have gotten this guy so worked up? It was a typical suburban street I lived in as a kid. Little to nothing ever happened, aside from the occasional car pulled over for one reason or another. Finally, the man arrived at my door. He beat his hands against the wood and shouted out, begging me to help. I was a kid. What the hell was I supposed to do? "Please, help me. They're coming," he yelled out from the other side of the front door. I pulled a chair up to the door and I stood on it to look out the peephole. The man looked young, maybe in his early 20s, though to my perception at the time, he may as well have been in his 60s. He had dark beard stubble and wore a thick blue hoodie, a knit cap and gloves. It was really cold outside, so I knew he had to be freezing. "Please, just let me in," he whimpered softly. "Just help me. I'm begging you." I felt bad for the guy, but I couldn't invite a stranger into the house, even if I believed he was truly scared. "I can't help you, mister," I called out to him. I hoped he would just move on to the next house after he heard that I was just a child, but it made him beg harder. "Please, kid, I won't hurt you. I just need to get off the street," he whined. "My dad says I can't have people over," I said, hoping to rationalize with the man. "Just let me in, please," he asked softly. "I'm sorry, mister. I can't. My dad would kill me," I reasoned. Suddenly, the man turned around, and I felt him push us back to the door. His head was right in front of the peephole now, and I couldn't see what was happening. "Oh God," he said. I jumped down from the chair and ran to the living room window again. By the time I made it to the glass, he started screaming out and pounding on the door again. I heard the doorknob jingle as he attempted to force his way in, but I'd locked it and deadbolted. "Jesus Christ, just let me in, for God's sake, please." He was wailing, and his voice had given way to high-pitched shrieks. As I glared out the window, I saw 3 dark shapes speeding across the road in front of my eyes. They were almost blurry, as if I looked through an unfocused camera lens. I couldn't even make out what they were, but they darted off the road and towards my house. I whipped the curtains closed and sat down on the floor under the window. Suddenly, the man's yells changed to blood-curdling squeals. I heard more pounding against the door, as well as the walls of the house, along with the sound of what reminded me of when my dad would cut the turkey at Thanksgiving. The yells turned to gargles, and I heard something wet spray to the ground and the siding of my house. I heard snapping and crunching sounds, along with something like fabric being torn. After the man's gargling scream stopped, there was a chorus of shrill squeaks that did not resemble anything I had ever heard before. It reminded me of when I would pinch the mouth of a balloon, letting the air out, only much louder and more guttural. After a moment, everything fell silent again. When I finally did emerge from my safe spot under the window, I ran up the stairs to my bedroom, locked the door and hid under my blanket until I fell asleep. I was awakened the next morning by the sound of police sirens out front, accompanied by a loud knock on the front door. I peeked out of my bedroom window to see several police cars and a black SUV parked on the road in front of the house. I was too scared to answer the door since my folks had not arrived back home yet. I just stayed up in my room and ignored the hammering on the front door. After a while, the knocking stopped, but the police stayed out there until my parents drove up an hour or so later. My mum came flying through the front door and up the stairs. She tried to get in, but my door was still locked. She just pounded and shouted for me to let her in. Her words, along with the knocking, sent a shiver up my spine after the previous night's events. I swung the door open and she pulled me into a hug. After a few minutes of holding me in place, she started grabbing my arms, checking for injuries. Once she was certain I was okay, she asked me if I heard anything last night. I'm not entirely sure why I lied to her and said I didn't hear anything. Maybe I felt guilty about what I assumed had happened to the yelling stranger. It could have just been as simple as I didn't want my folks to know I stayed up so late. Sometime later, my father came inside after the swarm of vehicles in our street thinned out. One of the cop cars and the black SUV stayed out the front for a while, and 2 officers went to each house of the neighborhood. It had been a bizarre series of events, but I paid no mind after a couple of weeks passed. Sure, kids at school spun many a rumor about the murder that had seemingly occurred on my street, though a body was never found. There was a great deal of blood that spread across the front of my parents' house and on the driveway. Some would theorize it was way more than the human body was capable of holding, but there had been a lot of exaggerated stories over that first week. For several months after the man begged to be allowed entry into my home, my parents refused to leave me at the house on my own. It was actually quite nice, if I'm being honest. Though I missed having the run of the place a bit, my folks were more attentive than they'd ever been. Again, I would never accuse them of being overly neglectful. They just never saw the danger in leaving the house with me as its only occupant until then. Of course, their new outlook didn't last for long. It was mid-December before I'd be left alone again. My parents had a Christmas party to attend with some friends, so they asked if I would be okay on my own. Given the fact I had no desire to be left with some babysitter who was only a few years older than me, I said I would be fine. Truthfully, though I enjoyed them being more attentive these days, I did miss my solitude. As was usually the case, my mum checked in around 10ish, to which I informed her all was well. She told me they would like to be home around 1, and recommended that I try to get to bed soon. Of course, I did not plan on hitting the sack until I saw the lights of my parents' Honda rolling into the driveway, but she didn't need to know that. After successfully riding my makeshift Captain America shield down the stairs several times in a row, I decided to just hunt for a good R-rated movie to bide my time until I had to head up to my bedroom. It was right around midnight when the knocking on the front door pulled my attention away from Jason steadily strolling after a fleeing topless girl. "Let me in," the voice called from outside. I instantly tensed up as my mind revisited the stranger who was left as nothing more than a bloody pool across the front lawn. My dad had ended up having to repaint the front of the house as the stains would not wash off. Even the concrete driveway still wore a few marks that would not clean up. "Come on, kid. Let me in," echoed from behind the door. I turned the volume up on the movie to attempt to block out the sounds. "Help me. Save me. Let me in," the voice called out, growing louder with every word. It wasn't like he was shouting. It was more like his vocal tones elevated in the same way I'd turned up the sound on the TV. Hesitantly, I crept over to the window to peer outside. I saw no evidence of anyone or anything. The whole neighborhood appeared to be at rest, but I still heard the man behind the door. "Just let me in. I won't hurt you. I promise," he called out again. I quietly carried the same chair over to gaze through the peephole. I froze in place after I accidentally bumped wood to wood while attempting to position my prop. "I know you're in there, kid. Just let me in, please." I climbed up to glance through the small, circular hole to see nobody out there. "Come on, kid. You can save me. You know that, right?" the invisible stranger asked. Certain that I had eaten way too much candy or had knocked myself senseless while sliding down the steps, I decided to just turn the TV off and head to bed. Even after I turned on the box fan I used to provide ambient sound to help me sleep, I still heard the voice, which now sounded like it was coming from directly my second-floor window. I sandwiched my head between two pillows, but it made little difference in the volume of the cries for help. "Don't go to sleep and leave me out here, kid. All you have to do is just let me in," it begged. It wasn't until I saw the light trace across the far wall of my bedroom that signified my parents' arrival that the voice fell silent. For years it carried on like that, always around midnight and only when I was alone. I got to the point of practically begging my folks not to leave when they would inevitably head out for the night, and even requested a babysitter when they would. They agreed to my requests for someone to watch over me while they were gone, but that ended after I turned 12. Sometimes I was able to arrange a sleepover with a friend, but there would be times I could not weasel my way out of being alone as the hours approached. Regardless of how often the voice would return, I was never able to just ignore it or push it to the recesses of my mind while I focused on other things. When my folks would be gone all night, the voice wouldn't stop until I finally drifted off to sleep, which always required quite the struggle to achieve. As the years progressed and my school days ended, I went off to college where I would have a roommate for a time. Though I would involve myself in any activity that would keep me from being alone in my dorm room after hours, there were still those times I would once again be at the mercy of the voice behind my door. No matter where I went in life, the stranger would follow, though there would never be evidence of his presence aside from the begging plea and knocks on the door. After college, I still maintained a roommate to avoid as many late-night visits as I could, though it would not keep them away entirely. I couldn't exactly forbid my housemate from having a life after all. For some years, I would only have to worry about the cries for help around the weekends,